I am Celeste Harrington, 60 years old.
And I watched federal agents handcuff my son-in-law in front of 200 shareholders, while my daughter screamed that I'd ruined everything. As the founder of a $60 million bakery empire, I'd given Margot every advantage. But I always maintained one boundary. You don't steal from family. 3 weeks earlier, a business attorney I barely knew called to warn me that someone was forging medical documents to have me declared incompetent. I hired a forensic accountant who discovered $2.8 million missing from company accounts. Then I found the file in Margot's home office, psychiatric evaluations, facility brochures, my forged signature on dementia diagnoses. They thought I was just a clueless old woman ready to be warehoused. I simply called my attorney, locked down my assets, and invited Sterling to present his restructuring plan at the shareholder meeting, where FBI agents were waiting with warrants. But let me start from the beginning, from the moment I realized something was wrong. Why it works drops listener directly into the climax with visceral stakes, federal arrests at a shareholder meeting, then pulls back to reveal the conspiracy. The $2. 8 million theft and forged dementia diagnoses create immediate outrage that keeps older listeners engaged. Thank you for choosing to listen. Before we begin, please drop a comment for me. Have you ever had to make an impossible choice to protect someone you love? Just yes or no. Your perspective might help someone else reading this. A quick note: some details are fictionalized for storytelling. What truly matters is the message this story carries. I turned 60 years old on the day I discovered my daughter was planning to destroy me. The realization didn't arrive with fanfare. It crept in through small discrepancies, the kind a mother learns to ignore because doubt feels like betrayal. I sat alone in my corner office at Harrington Artisan Bakery headquarters as evening light painted the Boston seaport gold, watching the harbor traffic and trying to convince myself that the unease coiling in my chest was just birthday melancholy. 60 years, 4 decades building an empire from burned hands and a rented kitchen that smelled like gas and old grease. I'd raised Margot to never know that hunger, that exhaustion. Private schools, summer homes in the Berkshires, college in Europe. Everything I never had, given freely because I believed love meant protection. I called her at 6 o'clock, hoping we could salvage the evening with dinner at Lucia's, our favorite Italian place in the North End where they knew us by name. "Margot, I thought we could celebrate at Lucia's tonight," I said when she answered. "Just the two of us." Her voice came through warm with manufactured regret. "Mom, I'm so sorry there's a crisis with the organic flour supplier. I'll be stuck here until midnight." I understood crises. I'd built this company through them. "I understand, sweetheart. The business comes first. I'll make it up to you this weekend, I promise." The call ended with her usual affection, her usual assurances. I set the phone down and noticed my hand was shaking slightly. Not from hurt feelings. I'd survived worse disappointments than a canceled birthday dinner. The tremor came from something else. Something I couldn't name yet. Then I heard it again in memory. The faint background noise during our conversation. Not the hum of our office ventilation or the quiet of after-hours work. Music. Live jazz. The kind that drifts from Back Bay restaurants where couples celebrate over wine and candlelight. I told myself I was being paranoid. A mother shouldn't doubt her only daughter over background music. Margot Harrington, 34 and perfectly coiffed, had been running daily operations for 3 years with the ease of someone who'd never worried about rent. Never felt the ache of standing on concrete for 16-hour shifts. She was competent, trusted, beloved by our staff. She was also lying about where she was tonight. I drove to my Beacon Hill brownstone trying to shake the suspicion, but it followed me up the stairs to my private study like a shadow with teeth. I needed documents before dining alone. Estate papers I'd been reviewing, nothing urgent. But the routine of preparation steadied my nerves. The oil painting of Boston Harbor swung aside on hidden hinges, revealing the wall safe I'd installed 15 years ago. Only I knew the combination. Only I had accessed the space since installation. I entered the code my scarred fingers had memorized the date of my first wedding cake sale, the triumph that became the foundation of everything. The lock didn't turn. I tried again, slower, certain I'd miskeyed in my distraction. The tumblers clicked uselessly. Wrong. The code was wrong. Cold dread replaced the ache of canceled plans. You think you know your children. You think the person you raised, fed, protected, taught the person who calls you mom with such easy affection would never invade the sanctuary where you keep your most private truths. You don't know them at all. I stood in my own study, locked out of my own safe, staring at the painting that had hidden my most sensitive documents for 15 years. Someone had been in this room. Someone had changed the combination without my knowledge or permission. Someone had taken what was mine. And the only person with a key to this house was celebrating her supplier crisis with live jazz somewhere across the city. I would find out where. I wasn't going to let a lie and a locked safe ruin my 60th birthday entirely. So I drove to Lucia's anyway. If Margot was working late on a supplier crisis, fine, I'd celebrate alone. But the jazz music haunted me during the drive, and the violated safe had transformed birthday disappointment into something colder. The Marlowe Boutique Hotel glowed warm against the North End's brick facades. I'd been coming to Lucia's for 15 years, long enough that the maitre d', a silver-haired professional named Dominic, greeted me with practiced warmth. "Good evening, Mrs. Harrington, your usual table?" "My daughter is already here." The question came out before I could stop it. His expression shifted to confusion. "Yes, she arrived about 30 minutes ago with her party. Center VIP booth. Should I?" "That's fine. I'll find her." The confirmation hit like a physical blow. 30 minutes. While telling me about the supplier crisis, Margot had already been seated here, ordering champagne, laughing over appetizers. The lie wasn't improvised desperation. It was premeditated exclusion. I walked through the candlelit dining room, hearing nothing but my pulse and the live jazz quartet that had betrayed her fiction. The restaurant smelled of garlic, white wine, fresh bread. Scents that usually meant comfort now felt like mockery. Then I heard Margot's laugh, that distinctive sound I'd know anywhere, bright and careless over the piano. The center VIP booth sat elevated on the small platform, visible to the entire restaurant. Margot presided at the head, radiant in the designer dress I'd bought her for Christmas. Beside her sat Sterling Thornton, her husband of 7 years, 37 and sharp in a suit that cost more than my first car. Across from them lounged Clifford Thornton, Sterling's father, 64 and perpetually condescending. The kind of man who treated his son's marriage to my daughter like a winning lottery ticket he'd personally orchestrated. Champagne flutes caught the light. Seafood towers rose between them. Empty oyster shells scattered like evidence. They'd been here a while. I stopped behind a decorative column, instinct overriding the impulse to march straight to their table. Something in their body language warned me to observe first, confront second. You know the moment when everything you thought you knew shatters like dropped crystal. This was mine. "The timing couldn't be more perfect," Clifford said, his voice carrying that satisfied boom he used when discussing business victories. "She'll never see it coming." Sterling raised his glass to family opportunities and to knowing when someone's outlived their usefulness. Margot's laugh rang out again, and she clinked her glass against his. "Sterling, you're terrible. But yes, to new beginnings." They drank, they smiled, they reached for more oysters like celebration was the most natural thing in the world. I stood perfectly still, my breathing shallow, processing the words. Outlived their usefulness, never see it coming, new beginnings. They were talking about me. "Dad, put that away," Sterling said suddenly, reaching across the table. "Not here." Clifford waved him off. "Relax, no one's paying attention to us." Between the champagne flutes and the debris of their feast sat a thick white folder. The kind medical offices use for comprehensive files. It bore a logo I didn't recognize, some hospital or clinic, the lettering too small to read from this distance. Clifford's hand rested on it possessively, tapping the cover with one manicured finger. My hands didn't shake. That's what surprised me most. They should have. My entire body should have been trembling with rage and betrayal and the sick realization that my only child was celebrating. Something terrible involving that medical folder and my complete ignorance. But my hands stayed steady, and my mind went very, very cold. The white folder lay there like a coiled snake between the champagne and the crab legs, its medical logo gleaming under the candlelight. I couldn't read the hospital name from this distance, but I didn't need to. Whatever was in that folder had something to do with me, and whatever they were celebrating involved my complete destruction. I stepped out from behind the column. I didn't run, didn't shout. I simply walked toward their table, my footsteps deliberate on the polished floor. They were so absorbed in their celebration, they didn't notice me yet, and I was close enough now to hear every word over the jazz piano. Sterling leaned forward, lowering his voice to that confidential tone men use when discussing business they shouldn't. The timeline is perfect. She won't be clear-headed enough to object much longer. Margot's laugh died into something nervous. Sterling, what if she fights it? She's still sharp. Not according to Dr. Wolf's assessment. Clifford tapped the white folder with satisfaction. Trust me, this is already done. The words landed like ice water down my spine. Won't be clear-headed enough to object. Dr. Wolf's assessment. Medical conspiracy crystallizing into something far worse than a lie about working late. I stopped 3 feet from their table. Margot saw me first. Her champagne glass froze halfway to her lips, and the color drained from her face so quickly I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Sterling followed her gaze, and his expression shifted from confident to trapped in the space of a heartbeat. Clifford's smile simply froze, his hand still possessive on the folder. The jazz continued its cheerful melody. Somewhere across the dining room, other diners laughed and clinked glasses. Our tableau sat in absolute silence. "Mom, what are you? I thought you were—" Margot's voice cracked on the words. "You thought I was what, Margot? Too stupid to find you? Too confused to notice the jazz music during your supplier crisis?" Sterling recovered first, sliding into that smooth voice he used when trying to charm his way out of mistakes. "Celeste, this isn't what it looks like. We can explain." "Can you?" I looked at each of them in turn. My daughter, who'd lied to my face on my birthday. My son-in-law, who'd just discussed my decline in clarity with satisfaction. His father, who thought I'd outlived my usefulness. "Please, explain the medical folder with my name on it." Clifford's hand twitched on the cover, but he didn't lift it. I reached across their celebration to breathe the champagne, the oyster shells, and the evidence of their joy at my destruction, and picked up the folder myself. My own name, on a neurological evaluation I'd never authorized. The header read, Comprehensive Cognitive Assessment, with a clinic logo I didn't recognize. Below that, my birth date, my address, and a doctor's signature I'd never seen before. Dr. Desmond Wolfe, neurological specialist. My hands stayed perfectly steady as I pulled out my phone. "Mom, wait, please let us explain." Margot half rose from her seat. "Put that down. That's private medical." Sterling reached toward me. I took 3 photographs. The folder cover with the clinic logo and my name. The first page with Dr. Cole's signature and the assessment header. The second page where I could see the words progressive cognitive decline and impaired judgment in the summary. Something shifted in me then, from mother to enemy. I set the folder back on their table with the careful precision of someone placing a chess piece. Margot's eyes brimmed with tears. "Mom, you have to understand." "Happy birthday to me," I said quietly. Then I turned and walked out. Past the shocked diners who'd witnessed the VIP booth drama. Past Dominic the maitre d', whose face showed careful neutrality. Out into the Boston night, where the air smelled like rain and betrayal. My phone held 3 photographs of a fraudulent neurological assessment bearing my name. Evidence of a conspiracy I didn't yet understand. My safe at home had a code I no longer knew. My daughter and her husband had just toasted to my complete destruction over seafood towers and champagne. They had no idea I was just beginning to use my mind. They thought they were hunting a confused old woman losing her grip on reality. By morning, I would know exactly who Dr. Wolfe was and what they'd paid him to write. By morning, I would understand the mechanism they planned to use, the legal trap they thought would catch me. By morning, I would be hunting them. I had calls to make. At 2 in the morning, the photograph on my phone screen glowed like a trap I'd walked straight into, except now I could see the mechanism. I sat in my darkened study where someone had violated my safe and stolen God knew what. But rage wasn't useful anymore. Analysis was. I enlarged the photograph until the medical folder filled my screen. My full name in clinical typeface. My birth date, address, social security number. All correct, all legitimate looking, all fabrication. The header read, Neuropsychological Evaluation, Confidential. Below it, a logo, Thorne Neurology Associates, followed by a Back Bay address I'd never visited. I've never set foot in that clinic, I said aloud to the empty room. They'd fabricated an entire medical file without me ever seeing a doctor. The audacity was almost impressive. I zoomed in on Dr. Wolf's signature, memorizing the loops and slashes. Below his name, MD, PhD, board-certified neurologist. Real qualifications for a fake diagnosis, or fake credentials entirely. By morning, I'd know. Then I noticed the date partially visible at the folder's edge, where my photograph had caught the corner beneath the cover page. May 1st, 2026. 3 weeks ago. You ever been so angry you become perfectly calm? That's where I was. The conspiracy didn't start last week. They'd been building this for a minimum of 3 weeks, probably longer. I pulled up my calendar, scrolling back to early May. May 1st had been a Thursday, nothing significant. But May 2nd family dinner at Margot's house, Sterling had made ossobuco, and Margot had been unusually solicitous. The memory crystallized with sickening clarity. Margot asking casually, Mom, did you remember your dentist appointment this week? You mentioned it last month. I'd laughed. Of course I remembered. When have I ever forgotten an appointment? Never, she'd said, squeezing my hand. I just worry about you sometimes. She wasn't concerned. She was building a case. Every question, every moment of manufactured worry designed to corroborate Dr. Wolf's fraudulent assessment. This isn't improvised. It's methodical. How many other conversations had I dismissed as daughterly concern? How many times had she asked about my memory, my schedule? All while collecting ammunition. I stared at the locked safe. They'd been in this room, touched my private documents, changed the code only I should know. The violation went deeper than money. They'd tried to steal my competence, my agency, my right to control my own life. As pre-dawn gray light seeped through the windows, I retrieved my address book. Vernon Garrison's private cell number was written in faded ink but perfectly legible. Vernon had been my corporate attorney for 32 years. He'd guided me through expansion, acquisitions, partnership disputes, hostile takeovers. He was 63, sharp as broken glass, and had seen enough corporate warfare to recognize an ambush. I checked the clock. 5:15 a.m. Vernon woke at 5 every morning to swim laps. By 5:30, he'd be at his kitchen table with coffee and the Wall Street Journal. Sleep was impossible. Strategy was everything now. I needed a shadow audit of Margot's finances, background on Dr. Wolf and Thorne Neurology Associates, understanding of what legal mechanism they planned conservatorship, power of attorney. Something else. Most importantly, I needed to know what else they'd done that I hadn't seen yet. The sun rose over Beacon Hill, painting my study in gold light that felt like mockery. I had a name, Dr. Wolf, and a timeline, 3 weeks minimum. What I didn't have was the full picture of what they'd stolen, how they'd documented it, or what legal mechanism they planned to use. Vernon would help me find all three. I dialed his number at 5:30 exactly. Vernon Garrison answered on the second ring, his voice alert despite the hour. He knew a 5:30 a.m. call from me meant crisis. Vernon, I need you to listen carefully. My voice was steady, clinical. Margot canceled my birthday dinner last night, claiming a work emergency. I found her at Lucia's celebrating with Sterling and his father. They had a medical folder with my name on it, a neurological evaluation I never authorized from a doctor I've never met. Silence. Not the confused kind, the processing kind. Dr. Desmond Wolf, I continued, Thorne Neurology Associates. The evaluation is dated 3 weeks ago. I was never there. Medical fraud for legal incapacitation. Vernon's voice went cold and sharp. Celeste, this is grounds for criminal prosecution. We need to.
Not yet. I cut him off.
I need to know what else they've done first, how deep this goes. Vernon Garrison, 62 and sharp as the day we met, had been my attorney since the first lawsuit threatened to sink my second bakery location. He'd guided me through expansion, hostile takeovers, partnership disputes. He'd never heard this tone in my voice. The one that said I wasn't looking for legal advice. I was declaring war. What do you need? He asked simply. Complete financial audit of Margot's transactions. 18 months. Every vendor payment. Every consulting fee. Everything. But it goes through you, not our internal accounting. No one inside the company can know. I heard him moving. The sound of car keys. 18 months is extensive. If we find fraud, it could be federal. Then we find it quietly. I'll be at my office in 20 minutes. I'll need your authorization to access the accounts. You already have full power of attorney for corporate emergencies. Use it. Another pause, heavier this time. Celeste, if I invoke emergency powers, the records will show my attorney conducting routine audit oversight, because that's what you're doing. Routine. 15 years we'd worked together. He'd never heard this particular edge in my voice. The one that came from discovering your child had systematically planned your destruction. I'll need to bring in forensic accountants, Vernon said. People I trust. It won't be cheap. I don't care about the cost. I care about the truth. Give me until 4 this afternoon. I'll have preliminary transaction analysis by then. Full deep dive will take 48 hours. I checked the clock. Nearly 6. What do I do if she contacts me today? Play confused. Play hurt. Make her think the photo shook you. His voice turned calculating. Let her feel confident. Confident people get sloppy. Something shifted in my chest. The last vestige of hoping I was wrong, that this was somehow a misunderstanding, died quietly. Vernon wouldn't talk like this if he thought there was innocent explanation. One more thing, I said. My home's safe. Someone changed the combination. I need to know what's missing, but I can't open it. I'll send someone this morning. Discreet. They'll have it open in an hour. Thank you, Vernon. Celeste. His voice softened slightly. I'm sorry. I know this is 4 p.m. I interrupted. I'll be at my office. Sometimes the hardest thing isn't fighting back, it's waiting to fight smart. I hung up and sat in the growing dawn light, my study slowly illuminating around me. Vernon's final words echoed. If there's a fake diagnosis, there's money behind it. Always. By 4 this afternoon, I would know if my daughter had just lied to me, or if she'd systematically robbed me blind. Part of me already knew which answer I'd get, the part that remembered her face at Lucia's. Lit with satisfaction as she toasted to someone outliving their usefulness. The part that had seen my own name on a medical evaluation I'd never authorized. The part that knew my safe had been violated by someone with a key to this house. I had 9 hours to pretend everything was normal. Margot arrived at my office at 9 sharp, carrying a white bakery box tied with ribbon, our own product, weaponized as peace offering. I'd had 3 hours to prepare for this performance. Showered, dressed in the soft lavender cardigan she'd given me for Christmas. Applied makeup carefully to look tired but not broken. Vulnerable but not suspicious. She entered looking perfectly contrite. Designer dress rumpled just enough to suggest she'd tossed all night with guilt. The bakery box landed on my desk with the kind of gentle care that said, I'm sorry, without words. Mom, I'm so sorry about last night. Her voice hit every rehearsed note of remorse. I never meant to hurt you. I let silence stretch between us, watching her shift her weight. Good actresses know when to pause. Sterling and his father insisted on celebrating the new building deal, she continued, filling the void I'd created. I should have told you. Should have invited you. It was thoughtless. The new building deal. Interesting framing for whatever Sterling and Clifford were actually celebrating my impending incapacitation. Perhaps. I understand you're hurt, Margot said, moving closer. I would be too. I opened the bakery box. Fresh croissants and almond tarts, still warm. The scent of butter and sugar filling my office. The same pastries I'd perfected 40 years ago in a kitchen that smelled like gas and ambition. The supplier crisis resolved itself, I asked quietly. It did. She didn't even flinch at the lie. Faster than expected. That's why Sterling wanted to celebrate. With his father. Yes. Margot sat in the chair across from my desk, the one where we'd celebrated her college graduation, her wedding announcement, her first successful quarter running operations. Mom, I need to be honest. Sterling's been so stressed about money lately. His father keeps pushing these investment opportunities. And I think last night was more about Clifford showing off than anything else. She was good. If I hadn't heard them last night toasting to someone outliving their usefulness, I'd have believed every word. The concerned wife trapped between demanding husband and overbearing father-in-law, just trying to keep peace. Investment opportunities, I asked, playing the role Vernon had coached me into. Confused, hurt, willing to forgive because that's what mothers do. Real estate mostly. Clifford has connections. Sterling thinks it's our path to financial independence. She reached across the desk, taking my hand. They don't understand boundaries the way we do. It's exhausting being in the middle. Financial independence. From me, presumably. From the empire I'd built that currently employed her at a salary I'd never questioned. I just want my mother back, Margot said, and tears actually welled in her eyes. Genuine or manufactured? I couldn't tell anymore. Can we move past this? Acting isn't hard when you're playing a role you know by heart. I'd been the trusting mother for 34 years. One more performance wouldn't kill me. I squeezed her hand. I know marriage is complicated, sweetheart. I forgive you. Relief flooded her face so completely I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Thank you, Mom. Her voice broke slightly. You don't know how much this means. Just try to make time for me sometimes. I let my voice waver exactly right. I won't be around forever. The phrase landed like I'd intended, feeding into whatever narrative they were building about my decline. Margot's relief deepened, her shoulders relaxing as she squeezed my hand again. Don't talk like that. You're going to outlive us all. Not if you have anything to say about it, I thought, but smiled instead. I hope so, sweetheart. She left 20 minutes later, hugging me at the door with what felt like genuine warmth. The successful deceiver. Carrying her victory like a trophy she didn't realize was hollow. I closed the door and checked my watch. 9:47 a.m. 7 hours until Vernon's call. 7 hours until I knew if my forgiveness was covering simple theft, systematic fraud, or something worse. The pastries sat untouched on my desk, still warm, still perfect, just like her lies. At 4 p.m., my phone would ring with the truth. Vernon didn't call at 4. He walked into my office at 4:02 p.m., carrying a bound report thick enough to be a murder weapon. And in a sense, it was. Simone Weaver followed him, closing the door with the kind of quiet precision she'd perfected over 15 years of managing my schedule and spotting my blind spots. She was 47, impossibly organized, and her expression told me she already knew what the report contained. Vernon set it on my desk without preamble. The cover page showed a single line, Sterling Brand Consulting, LLC, Transaction Analysis, May 2024 to November 2025. $1.4 million, Vernon said, to a company that doesn't exist beyond incorporation papers. The number landed like a physical blow. I'd expected theft. I'd braced for 6 figures, maybe more. But this... Sterling Brand Consulting, I repeated. Sterling's company. Registered in Delaware 6 months before the first payment. Vernon opened the report to a tab marked Summary. 14 separate invoices over 18 months. Monthly payments ranging from $60,000 to $120,000. I stared at the spreadsheet. Each line showed a date, an amount, a description. Brand positioning analysis. Strategic market consultation, consumer insights development, all approved by Margot Harrington, Director of Operations. Tell me there's work product, I said quietly. Tell me there's something to justify this. Vernon's silence was answer enough. Simone spoke for the first time, her voice tight. I pulled every file in our project management system, every email thread, every shared document. She paused. There's nothing. Not one deliverable, not one report, not even a proposal. 1.4 million. Stolen by my daughter. From the company I built with my hands. She used her authority as operations director to fast-track approvals. Vernon continued, flipping to another tab. Bypassed the vendor review protocols you established. The invoices went straight through accounting. I forced myself to focus on the details, pushing emotion into a box I'd deal with later. Who else signed off on these? Just Margot. That's the problem. Or the evidence, depending on how you look at it. She claimed executive authority on every payment. Simone shifted in her chair, and something in her movement made me look up. There's more, I said. Not a question. I should have come to you directly, Simone said, guilt written across her face. 4 months ago, I flagged the first Sterling Brand consulting invoice. It looked wrong. The amount was high, and I'd never heard of the company. What happened? Margot told me it was a special project you'd approved personally, that you didn't want to be bothered with administrative details while you were dealing with family stress. Simone's voice dropped. She asked me not to bother you with it. Simone's loyalty wasn't the problem. My daughter's betrayal was. She said I approved it, that I knew. Yes, I'm so sorry, Celeste. I should have verified with you directly, but she was so convincing. And you'd seemed distracted lately. Simone stopped herself. That's not an excuse. I failed you. You didn't fail me. I reached across the desk, touching her hand briefly. You trusted someone you thought you could trust. That's not failure. Vernon cleared his throat. The invoices stopped 4 weeks ago, right when the medical evaluation is dated. The connection clicked into place with sickening clarity. They'd bled the company for a year and a half, and when the money slowed or suspicions grew, they'd shifted to a new strategy. One that involved declaring me incompetent so they could take everything at once. Vernon closed the audit report and asked the question I'd been dreading. Do you want to know where the money went? I looked at the evidence of systematic theft from my life's work, at Simone's guilty relief at finally telling the truth, at Vernon's grim certainty that this was just the beginning. The medical folder, the changed safe code, the celebration dinner, they were all connected, pieces of a larger conspiracy I'd only begun to see. I needed to know everything. Vernon spread the Delaware corporate registration documents across his conference table like evidence at a crime scene. I'd arrived at his financial district office at 8:30, still processing what we'd discovered the day before. $1. $4 million flowing through Sterling Brand Consulting, LLC, to destinations unknown. Now I was about to learn who actually owned the shell company that had robbed me. The registered agent is a law firm in Wilmington, Vernon said, sliding the first document toward me. Standard for Delaware corporations. But the actual owner of record is listed here. His finger tapped a name that made my stomach drop. Nadine Brennan. Who the hell is Nadine Brennan? I asked. Vernon's expression was grim. Nadine Brennan, age 61, is Clifford Sterling's older sister. She lives in Philadelphia. Worked as an estate planning attorney until she retired 3 years ago. I stared at the name. Clifford had mentioned a sister once, maybe twice, in passing. Never introduced us. Never brought her to family dinners or holidays. I'd assumed they weren't close. So Clifford's family is stealing from me, I said slowly. This isn't just Sterling being ambitious. This is organized. It's worse than that. Vernon pulled out another document. Look at the incorporation date. I looked. November 14th, 2024. My daughter wasn't the mastermind. She was a tool. Somehow, that made it worse. Margot and Sterling got married May 10th, 2025, I said, my voice flat. This company was created 6 months before their wedding. Exactly. Vernon sat back in his leather chair. Sterling Brand Consulting existed before Sterling proposed to your daughter, before he had any legitimate claim to access Harrington corporate finances. The implications crashed over me like cold water. Clifford hadn't fallen in love with Margot and then gotten greedy. He'd identified a target, created the infrastructure to steal from it, and then married into the family. The whole romance had been premeditated. The medical documents, I said, declaring me incompetent. That was always part of the plan, wasn't it? Even before they said their vows. We can't prove that yet, Vernon said carefully, but the timeline is damning. And there's another detail. He pointed to a section of the incorporation papers. Nadine Brennan was disbarred in Pennsylvania in 2023 for misappropriating client funds from estate accounts. Jesus Christ. She settled the civil suit, avoided criminal charges, but lost her license. So when her little brother needed help setting up a shell company to embezzle from his future mother-in-law, she had the expertise and nothing left to lose. I thought about Margot at 28, brilliant and ambitious, but also naive about men, about motives. She'd been so happy when Sterling proposed. I'd watched her fall in love in real time, watched her plan the wedding with the kind of joy I hadn't seen since she was a child. You ever realize your son-in-law married you, not your daughter? The thought made me feel sick. Where's the money, Vernon? I asked. The $1.4 million. Where did it actually go? Vernon's hand moved to a manila folder I hadn't noticed yet, sitting separate from the Delaware documents. The folder was thick, bulging with papers. That's the question that kept me up last night, he said. Sterling Brand Consulting received the money from Harrington Bakery accounts. But it didn't stay there. The funds moved again within 48 hours of each transfer. Moved where? Vernon opened the folder, and I saw bank statements, wire transfer records, account numbers I didn't recognize. His expression was darker than I'd ever seen it. That's what I need to show you, he said quietly. Because where the money went is going to change everything you think you know about this situation. The offshore banking statements Vernon laid out showed exactly where my stolen money had been living its best life. Wire transfers, withdrawal records, account summaries, all from a Cayman Islands trust I'd never heard of until 30 seconds ago. The money left Sterling Brand Consulting LLC within 48 hours of every transfer from Harrington Bakery, Vernon said, arranging the documents in chronological order. It went here, the Brennan Family Trust, established November 16, 2024, 2 days after the shell company was incorporated. I scanned the account opening documents. Clifford Sterling listed as financial advisor. Sterling Brand Consulting listed as beneficiary. The trust structure was elegant. I had to admit, layers of corporate veils designed to hide money from tax authorities and angry mothers-in-law. All $1.4 million went through this account? I asked. Every penny over the course of 18 months, from December 2024 through March 2026. Where did it go from there? Vernon pulled out a thick stack of withdrawal records. Everywhere. Let me show you the pattern. He walked me through it line by line. $85,000 for chartered jets to the Amalfi Coast. $140,000 in jewelry purchases from Cartier and Tiffany. I recognized the dates. Margot had worn a stunning sapphire bracelet to Easter dinner this year and told me Sterling had surprised her. Cheapert said he'd been saving for months. $60,000 for annual memberships at some exclusive wellness center in Back Bay, with a waiting list longer than Harvard's. Private jets, Vernon said quietly. 5-star hotels, designer jewelry, all on your dime. I thought about Margot in my office yesterday morning, bringing me croissants, telling me Sterling had been stressed about money lately, worried about his consulting business. She'd looked so sincere. She told me Sterling was stressed about money, I said, my voice flat, this morning, in my office. She was covering. They've been living off this for over a year. They stole my money to buy champagne while planning to lock me away. I forced myself to keep reading. More withdrawals, a BMW lease, Michelin-starred restaurants, wine auctions. The Cayman account had become their personal ATM, funded by systematic theft from the company I'd built from nothing. The total luxury spending is around $285,000, Vernon said. Jets, jewelry, spa packages, cars. They burned through a fifth of what they stole just playing rich. I was about to ask where the rest had gone when Vernon's finger stopped on a single line item dated April 2nd, 2026, 6 weeks ago, the week before my birthday. Thorne Neurology Associates, $120,000. The room tilted. The clinic from the photograph, I said slowly. They paid Dr. Wolf with my own money. They stole from you to buy the diagnosis that would let them steal everything else, Vernon said. His voice was carefully neutral, but I could see the rage in his eyes. The embezzlement wasn't separate from the medical fraud. It funded the medical fraud. I stared at the wire transfer record. $120,000, sent from a Cayman trust filled with money embezzled from my company, paid to the neurologist who'd supposedly evaluated me for dementia. The conspiracy wasn't two parallel schemes. It was one unified plan, and every piece fed into the next. The cruelty wasn't just theft, it was making me pay for my own destruction. $120,000 seems excessive for a single evaluation, I managed to say. Vernon closed the banking folder and looked at me with the expression lawyers reserve for the worst news. That's because it wasn't payment for a single evaluation, he said quietly. The $120,000 was a down payment. There's a contract. He pulled another document from his briefcase. I could see Dr. Wolf's clinic letterhead. Dense paragraphs of legal text. A payment schedule. A down payment for what? I asked, though some part of me already knew the answer would be worse than I could imagine. Vernon slid the contract across the table toward me. For ongoing neurological certification, he said. Monthly evaluations, progressive diagnosis documentation, testimony if needed. The medical fraud isn't finished, Celeste. It's just beginning. Vernon made the call at 8 p.m., and by midnight, Ronan Pierce was sitting across from me in a locked conference room. Doctor, Cole's contract had been explicit monthly evaluations, progressive documentation of cognitive decline, expert testimony if required. But contracts told you the what, not the when or how. The money trail shows the payment, not the plan, I'd told Vernon. I need their communications. Vernon had gone very still. You're talking about digital espionage. That's a federal offense. They paid a doctor to declare me incompetent with my own stolen money, I said. I'm past caring about lines. He'd studied me for a long moment, then pulled out his phone. Now Ronan Pierce sat across from me, 41 years old, with the calm expression of someone who'd seen worse than family conspiracies. Former federal cyber forensics analyst Vernon had explained. Now he operated in the gray zone between corporate security consulting and things we wouldn't discuss in depositions. He'd arrived carrying nothing but a laptop and an encrypted phone. Vernon says you need server access, Ronan said. Whose? And what are you looking for? My son-in-law, Clifford Sterling, I said. Everything. Emails, texts, encrypted messaging apps. Encrypted apps are harder, could take 12 to 18 hours depending on his security setup. Ronan extracted communications from a Fortune 100 CEO's private server last year, Vernon said. Never left a trace. I was hiring someone to commit a federal felony. I should have felt guilty. I felt efficient. I need to know what they're planning to do with that fake diagnosis, I said, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were the documents Vernon and I had compiled the embezzlement trail. The shell company, the offshore trust, the payment to Dr. Wolf's clinic. Ronan scanned them quickly. When he reached the contract with Thorne Neurology Associates, he paused. Medical fraud communications fall under HIPAA federal monitoring, he said. Makes this riskier. How much riskier? I asked. For you or for me? Both. If they're discussing patient information through hospital systems or clinical email, federal algorithms flag keyword patterns. Breaching those communications triggers extra scrutiny. Can you work around it? Vernon asked. I can work around anything, Ronan said. But you need to understand what you're authorizing. If Sterling's communicating with Dr. Wolf through official channels, we're talking about penetrating potentially monitored medical networks. What's the actual risk? I asked. Ronan closed the folder. If I'm careful, and I'm always careful, detection risk is under 2%. Tracing it back to you specifically is functionally 0. Me facing federal charges if something goes catastrophically wrong is real but manageable. You ever cross a line you thought you'd never cross? That midnight was mine. "What do you need from me?" I asked. "Sterling's email address, phone number, any account information you have, device model if you know it, where he works, network habits." I pulled out my phone and started listing what I knew. Sterling used an iPhone. His email was through his consulting firm domain. He worked from home 3 days a week. From a WeWork in the financial district, the other 2. Margot had mentioned he was obsessive about privacy settings. Obsessive privacy is either very good security or performance security, Ronan said. Making notes. We'll know which in about an hour. He asked whether Sterling had ever connected to Harrington corporate servers. I told him yes, Sterling had worked from my guest office dozens of times over the past year, always on the secure network. Ronan smiled for the first time. That helps. He opened his laptop fully, fingers already moving across the keyboard with the efficiency of someone who'd broken into systems far more secure than my son-in-law's. "I'll start with his email server," he said. "If he's smart, this takes 18 hours. If he's arrogant, I'll have it in 6. Sterling was arrogant. The clock on my office wall ticked past midnight, each second a small eternity, while Ronan's fingers danced across his keyboard in silence. And I found myself staring at my own hands, the hands that had built an empire, now clenched white-knuckled on the armrest of a chair I'd purchased with my first $1,000,000. Sterling had been arrogant. Ronan had smiled when he said it, and now I understood why. The breach was moving faster than expected. Ronan sat at my conference table, 3 laptop screens casting blue light across his concentrated face. Vernon occupied the chair near the window, steady and silent, his presence alone a comfort. I'd tried reading quarterly reports, revenue projections, expansion proposals, the ordinary machinery of legitimate business. But the words swam together. Everything felt surreal. I was a woman who'd built a bakery empire through relentless discipline and careful adherence to law. And tonight, I was paying someone to commit federal crimes on my behalf. The overhead lights caught the faint white lines across my palms. Burn scars. I'd forgotten about them, stopped seeing them decades ago. Expensive manicures every 2 weeks for 30 years. And still the marks remained, thin, pale threads, mapping where industrial oven racks had seared through cheap cotton gloves I couldn't afford to replace. I'd been 23, rising at 3 in the morning in a rented commercial kitchen that smelled of gas and old grease. The ovens were ancient, temperamental machines that heated unevenly and burned anyone careless enough to trust them. I'd learned not to trust anything. That first year, I'd worked alone, couldn't afford employees, couldn't afford proper equipment. Some mornings my hands shook so badly from exhaustion I could barely pipe frosting, but I'd pipe it anyway because Mrs. Bradford had ordered a wedding cake and $340 felt like a fortune. Vernon stood, joints creaking, and crossed to the coffee service. The sound of fresh grounds, the hiss of the espresso machine, absurdly normal sounds in the middle of a felony. He brought me a cup without asking, the way he'd done for 32 years. Some rituals survived even crime. I'd raised Margot deliberately differently. Private schools where classmates had trust funds, summer homes in the vineyard, college without student loans. I'd wanted her to know security, opportunity, the freedom that comes from never wondering if you can afford tomorrow. I'd created the monster stealing from me. The thought sat in my chest like a stone. She'd never burned her hands on anything. Never woken at 3 a.m. from necessity rather than choice. Never known what it meant to build something from nothing, because I'd given her everything. The bitter irony was exquisite. I'd protected her from hunger and exhaustion and struggle, and in doing so, I'd raised someone who saw my empire as inheritance rather than achievement, something to take, not something to earn. The sky outside began to lighten, false dawn turning the Boston skyline from black to gray. 2 minutes, Ronan said without looking up. It was the first time he'd spoken in 4 hours. Vernon and I both straightened. The weight of those 2 words transforming the room from waiting chamber to war room. I watched Ronan's fingers move across the keyboard with surgical precision. A final keystroke. Then he leaned back, exhaling slowly. When he looked up, his expression stopped my breath. Not triumphant, troubled. "You should see this now," he said quietly. "Before Vernon, before anyone." The way he said it made my blood run cold. I crossed to Ronan's station, my reflection ghostly in the dark window behind him. On his screen, Sterling's email inbox, hundreds of messages arranged by date, and one subject line that made my heart stop. R.E. Mother's Diagnosis Timeline for Conservatorship. Sent by Margot. The date stamp read April 23rd, 2026, 3 weeks before my birthday. 3 weeks before she'd brought those croissants to my office and told me, with tears in her eyes, that I needed to see a neurologist. I clicked the email thread open with a hand that had stopped shaking rage. I'd learned over 60 years was steadier than fear. The earliest message was dated December 8th, 2025. Subject line, Mom's Situation. From Margot to Sterling, not the other way around. My daughter had started this. The text was clinical, efficient. "We need to move on the diagnosis soon. The longer we wait, the more risk she changes the trust structure. Target timeline." Sterling's reply came 3 hours later. January evaluation, March reveal. File for emergency conservatorship by June 1st. Gives us legal positioning before quarterly board review. I stared at the date, December 8th. 3 weeks after I'd made Margot primary beneficiary of the charitable trust. $280 million in legacy giving. And she'd responded by plotting to have me declared incompetent. Vernon read over my shoulder, his breath sharp. "They're discussing your incompetence like a stock transaction." I scrolled down. More exchanges, Margot asking about risk factors, Sterling reassuring her. Then, in a message dated December 15th, "I know someone, Dr. Desmond Wolfe, neurologist. He understands discretion and compensation structures." Ronan leaned forward, fingers flying across another keyboard. "Pulling Wolfe's medical license records now." The thread continued, Margot expressing concern about being too obvious. Sterling calm, methodical, explaining how emergency conservatorships worked when family members showed genuine concern for an aging parent's welfare. The word genuine made my stomach turn. "There's more," Ronan said quietly. "The actual medical file." "Show me everything," I said. He projected it onto my office screen. Dr. Desmond Wolfe's letterhead, Thorne Neurology Associates. A comprehensive neurological evaluation. 12 pages of clinical observations and test results. Patient exhibits marked disorientation and poor judgment in financial matters. I read the words aloud, my voice flat. I was closing the Meridian acquisition that week, $42 million deal. I negotiated personally. Clock drawing test. Patient unable to accurately render clock face or place hands at specified time. I'd never taken a clock drawing test in my life. Memory assessment. Patient demonstrates significant short-term memory deficits. Unable to recall 3 objects after 5-minute interval. I thought of Margot at 7 years old, crying because I'd missed her school play for a board meeting, and how I'd promised to always put her first after that. I remembered that promise. I remembered every promise I'd ever made to her. And apparently, she remembered none she'd made to me. The evaluation date sat at the top of the page, January 15th, 2026. "January," Vernon said. "They've been planning this since January." 4 months, I whispered. 4 months of fabricated medical evidence while Margot had smiled at me across Sunday dinners, kissed my cheek, asked about my health with such convincing concern. Ronan's expression was grim. Wolfe isn't even a licensed neurologist anymore, suspended in 2024 for falsifying insurance claims. He's been operating out of that boutique clinic ever since. Cash only, no oversight. So Sterling found a disgraced doctor willing to fabricate a diagnosis for money, Vernon said. For $120,000, I said, remembering the wire transfer from Task 3.2. The amount still felt obscene. In April. I scrolled to the bottom of the thread. An attachment caught my eye. labeled draft_conservatorship_petition_final.pdf. I opened it. Legal filing papers, Commonwealth of Massachusetts Superior Court, petition for emergency conservatorship. My name in the caption as the allegedly incompetent person. The exam date was my birthday, January 15th, the day I'd turned 60. They'd scheduled the fake neurological evaluation for the same day I'd celebrated 6 decades of life, and I'd never even known I'd supposedly attended. At the bottom of the petition, a date for filing, June 1st, 2026. I looked at my desk calendar, May 19th. They were 2 weeks away, I said. 2 weeks from declaring me legally incompetent. Vernon's voice cut through the silence, carefully controlled in the way that meant he was furious. There's a payment record here in the email attachments. Sterling documenting the wire transfer for his own files. Final second, $120,000 to Wolf's personal account. He looked at me, and I saw the same thought crystallizing in both our minds. If they'd paid this much for a fake diagnosis, what else had they bought? Vernon crossed to my office bookshelf and pulled down the leather-bound volume I hadn't opened in a decade. Harrington Enterprises. Corporate Bylaws. Amended 2006. The answer to what else they'd bought wasn't more bribes. It was what they'd planned to do with the one they'd already paid for. The diagnosis had to be neurological, Vernon said, paging through the bylaws with the certainty of someone who'd already worked out the answer. Not cancer, not physical illness, cognitive impairment specifically. Why does that matter? I asked, though dread was already forming in my chest. Vernon found the page he wanted. Because of this. He turned the book toward me. Section 7, Article 4, Emergency Medical Proxy Provision. I knew what it said before I read it. I'd written the damn thing myself. Wait, Vernon said, pulling up Sterling's wire transfer details on Ronan's laptop. His finger traced the memo line. Look at this. I read it. Medical Certification Re Section 7.4 Compliance. They didn't just pay for a diagnosis, Vernon said quietly. They paid for the specific legal trigger they needed. They knew exactly which clause to exploit. My hands were shaking again. Not from fear this time, from rage at the precision of it. Vernon began reading the clause aloud, his lawyer's voice steady and clinical. In the event the chief executive officer is certified by a licensed physician as suffering from cognitive impairment materially, affecting judgment and decision-making capacity, emergency transfer of executive authority may be enacted within 48 hours to the designated successor, pending permanent resolution by the board of directors. I recognized my own legal language, the careful phrasing I'd crafted with such precision. I wrote that after Gerald Hutchins had his stroke, I said. He was on the board. The company was paralyzed for 3 months while his family fought over medical decisions. We nearly lost the Henderson merger. I remembered drafting that clause, proud of my foresight, certain I was building something that would outlast me. You were protecting the company from leadership vacuum, Vernon said. They're using it to create one. The mechanics crystallized in my mind with horrible clarity. With Wolf's diagnosis, Margot could have taken control in 48 hours, before I even knew what was happening. Before anyone knew. Vernon agreed. The clause allows for emergency action specifically to prevent prolonged uncertainty. It's designed to be fast. Who's the designated successor? I asked, though I already knew. You named Margot when you made her chief operating officer last year. Of course I had. She was my daughter, my chosen heir. I'd been grooming her to run the company since she was 25, and she'd been planning to steal it since the week I'd trusted her with the charitable trust. The conservatorship petition, I said slowly, that was just the legal paperwork to make it permanent. But she could have taken operational control immediately with Wolf certification. Vernon nodded. Within 48 hours of presenting the medical evaluation to the board, she'd have had access to everything: accounts, contracts, personnel decisions. By the time anyone questioned the diagnosis, she'd have consolidated power. How long had she been reading my own bylaws? Searching for the knife I'd left lying on the table. Vernon turned to the inside cover of the bylaws. A copy notation showed it had been printed for the executive office in 2023. He opened it fully. and I saw handwriting in the margins. Margot's handwriting. Section 7.4 marked in red ink. And next to it, a date in her precise script, December 11th, 2025. The week after I'd made her primary beneficiary. The week she'd begun planning my destruction. "She'd been studying this," I whispered, "reading the bylaws, looking for the vulnerability." "And she found it," Vernon said. "The protection you built became her weapon." He closed the bylaws, his expression grave. "There's something else. The clause requires 2 physician certifications for permanent transfer. Wolf was only 1. He met my eyes, and I felt the floor drop out from under me. "We need to find out who they lined up as the second signature before June 1st. Ronan's voice cut through our discussion about the second doctor. "You need to see what else was in Sterling's deleted folder, the one labeled Transitional Care." The name alone made my skin crawl. Transitional Care. The euphemism they'd chosen for what came after they stole my company. Ronan pulled up a new screen. Email exchanges, carefully recovered from Sterling's deleted files. The recipient made my blood run cold. Whispering Pines Memory Care Facility. "He started shopping for facilities in January," Ronan said quietly. "Same month they commissioned the fake diagnosis." I leaned forward, reading the first message. Sterling's personal email, not his business account. Subject line: Inquiry regarding high-profile client requiring discretion. The facility director's response was professionally warm, assuring Sterling that Whispering Pines specialized in families who valued privacy and security. The word security sat in my throat like broken glass. Vernon read over my shoulder, his voice tight. "Sterling asks about locked memory care units. Jesus Christ." The email was clinical in its cruelty. Sterling wanted to know about restricted visitation policies. How quickly could they accept a patient following medical certification? What were their protocols for residents who resisted? Admission. Residents who resisted. As if I wouldn't fight being kidnapped and imprisoned. "They were going to lock me away," I said. The words came out flat, emotionless. I was past shock now, past horror. Somewhere on the other side of rage was a cold, calculating fury that felt almost peaceful. Ronan scrolled down. The inquiry was dated January 9th, 2026. Less than a month after Margot had sent that first email to Sterling about my situation. They'd moved from conspiracy to imprisonment in 30 days. I'd spent 40 years building something to leave her, and she'd spent 4 months planning my cage. "There's more," Ronan said, pulling up another thread. He negotiated a standing reservation. The email was dated March 5th, Sterling confirming room availability beginning June 2nd, 2026. One day after their planned conservatorship filing. The facility director assured him they could accept a patient within 4 hours of receiving medical certification and family authorization. 4 hours, from courtroom to locked ward in the time it took to eat lunch. "June 2nd, I whispered. They had every day planned. Vernon was reading ahead, his face growing darker. "The facility specializes in patients whose families want them contained. Look at their services list. Minimal outside contact during adjustment period." Sterling specified that as indefinite. "This isn't healthcare," Vernon said, his voice shaking with controlled rage. "It's kidnapping." I kept reading. Sterling asked about phone access. Could it be restricted? The director explained that for residents with cognitive impairment, communication privileges were determined by the legal guardian to prevent confusion and agitation. Sterling responded that all communication would require his personal approval. My personal approval. To speak to anyone. To call for help. To tell the world what they'd done. The room Sterling selected had no outside windows. Ronan pulled up an attachment. Tour confirmation from March 19th. He visited the facility to inspect accommodations. I clicked it open. The confirmation listed 2 attendees for the site visit. Clifford Sterling and Margot Harrington Sterling. My daughter had gone with him. She'd walked through Whispering Pines, inspected the locked memory care unit, looked at the room with no windows where they planned to imprison me. According to the facility notes, she'd asked detailed questions about visitation restrictions and phone access policies. She'd personally vetted my cage. Vernon set down his coffee cup with shaking hands. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "The deposit Sterling paid to hold the room," he said, pointing to a wire transfer record. $28,000 for 3 months advance. He looked at me with something like awe. "That's exactly what you were going to gift Margot for her birthday next month. The amount's been sitting in your personal account earmarked for her gift. He used your own money to reserve your prison cell." Ivy found me in the brownstone library that afternoon, her 8-year-old face carrying the kind of guilt that comes from keeping a terrible secret too long. I'd returned home from headquarters to think, to process the enormity of what Sterling had done with my money, using my own gift to pay for my imprisonment. Then my granddaughter appeared in the doorway, eyes red from crying. "Grandma." Her voice was small, uncertain. "Can I tell you something?" I set down my tea and opened my arms. She ran to me, burying her face against my shoulder. "What is it, sweetheart?" "I heard Mommy on the phone," she whispered. 3 weeks ago. She was in her office and didn't know I was there." My heart went still. "What did you hear?" She said you wouldn't be a problem much longer, that there was a place where you'd be taken care of." Ivy pulled back, tears streaming down her face. "I wanted to tell you, Grandma, but Mommy said I shouldn't worry you about grown-up things. She said you were getting confused, and I might hear things that would scare me, but they were just trying to help you." I held her tighter, fighting to keep my voice gentle when rage was screaming through every nerve. "You did nothing wrong, sweetheart. Nothing at all. Are they going to take you away?" "No," I said firmly. "No one is taking me anywhere." Ivy's tears soaked through my blouse. "Mommy said you were sick in the head, that you'd have to go to a special hospital soon. And kids aren't allowed to visit there." She said I had to be brave about saying goodbye. Margot had been preparing her own daughter for my disappearance, grooming an 8-year-old to accept the erasure of her grandmother from her life. I held Ivy until she stopped crying, promising her everything would be fine, sending her home with cookies and reassurance. The moment her car pulled away, I let the mask drop. After Ivy left, I stood at the brownstone window and let myself feel it, the full weight of a mother's plan to erase her own mother from her child's life. Vernon arrived at headquarters that evening with the righteous energy of someone ready for war. "We have everything," he said, spreading documents across my desk. Fraud, conspiracy, attempted conservatorship under false pretenses, medical fraud, embezzlement. FBI would arrest them tonight. I can make the call right now. "No," I said. Vernon stopped mid-reach for his phone. "What?" "No FBI. Not yet. Celeste. They were going to lock you in a memory care facility with no windows and no phone access. They paid for it with your own money. We have them. And they'd get 18 months, maybe 2 years," I said calmly. "Often 14 with good behavior, still wealthy from what they've already stolen. Margot would keep the trust assets. Sterling would keep whatever he's hidden offshore. They'd serve minimum time in minimum security and come out with their lives intact." Vernon studied me like he was seeing someone new, and maybe he was. The businesswoman had left the room. The predator had arrived. "What are you proposing?" he asked carefully. "I want them to destroy themselves first," I said. "Prison is too kind, too quick. I want financial annihilation. I want reputational obliteration. I want them to lose everything they think they've gained, everything they've built on my stolen foundation, before they ever see the inside of a courtroom." Vernon sat back slowly. "You want them to destroy themselves first." "I want them to think they've won," I said. "Let the June 1st deadline approach. Let them file the conservatorship petition. Let them think the trap has closed. And then I spring the trap they never saw coming." I pulled up the calendar on my screen, marking June 1st with a red flag. "We have 13 days," I said. 13 days to let them think they're winning while we build something they'll never see coming." Vernon leaned forward, and I saw the moment he understood I wasn't just planning revenge. I was engineering devastation. "What exactly are we building?" Simone Weaver arrived at my office at 7 that morning, 2 days after I'd decided to become the very thing my daughter was trying to make me. confused, diminished, vulnerable. My chief communications officer for 12 years, 48 years old, with the kind of discretion that had kept 100 corporate crises out of the press. Simone was exactly who I needed for the performance of my life. "You want me to help you pretend to lose your mind?" she asked after I'd explained Vernon's question and my answer. We were building a trap disguised as cognitive decline. "I want you to help me convince my daughter she's winning," I said. "There's a difference." Simone set down her coffee, processing. I'd given her the abbreviated version, the embezzlement, the fake diagnosis, the planned institutionalization, enough to understand why I needed her complicity in what came next. "How confused should you be?" she asked finally, her tone shifting from shocked to strategic. "Gradual, subtle, the kind of mistakes that seem innocuous until they form a pattern." I pulled up the notes Vernon and I had drafted. Wrong names occasionally, forgotten meeting details, minor confusion about dates or locations. Nothing dramatic, we're not performing dementia, just early signs of stress affecting memory. "You need witnesses," Simone said, understanding immediately. "People who'll mention it in passing. Let the rumor build organically." "Exactly, and you need to be the gracious professional who covers for me. Gentle corrections, concerned but loyal." Simone studied me with something between admiration and horror. I've suspected something was wrong with Margot for months. She's been asking me pointed questions about succession protocols, your daily schedule, board meeting attendance. I thought she was just being protective, but the intensity felt off. The observation didn't surprise me. Margot had been gathering intelligence while planning my destruction. "She'll be watching for signs I'm declining," I said. "We're going to give her exactly what she expects to see." We spent the next 2 hours choreographing errors, small moments, believable lapses. I'd spent 40 years building a reputation for sharp-minded ruthlessness. Dismantling it would be the performance of my life. At 10:30, Simone and I walked into the headquarters lobby where morning meetings were breaking up. Junior staff milled near the elevators. Several executives discussed the Henderson contract by the coffee service. Perfect audience. Simone approached with a folder of quarterly messaging drafts, and I turned toward her with a warm, professional smile. "Sandra, perfect timing," I said clearly. "I need you to review the quarterly messaging before the board presentation." The briefest pause. Simone's expression showed nothing but gentle professionalism. "It's Simone. Miss Harrington," she said quietly, her tone respectful, kind. "But yes, I have the drafts ready." I blinked, let confusion cross my face for just a moment, then laughed self-deprecatingly. "Of course, Simone!" I don't know where my mind went. Too much on my plate this morning. "Completely understandable," Simone said smoothly. "You've been running hard. Let's grab coffee and go through these." We moved toward the elevator, our conversation shifting to normal business matters. But I'd caught the glance between 2 junior staffers, the slight frown from a marketing director who'd overheard. The junior staffer who witnessed the exchange looked uncomfortable.
Sympathetic. Exactly the reaction we needed.
Ronan had taps on Margot's phone and email monitoring when the story reached her. I gave it 2 hours maximum. It took 90 minutes. I was reviewing acquisition proposals when my phone buzzed with Ronan's text. A screenshot from Margot's messages to Sterling. "Jessica from marketing just told me Mom called Simone Sandra in the lobby this morning. Seemed genuinely confused for a moment. It's starting. Right on schedule." Sterling's reply was immediate. Wolf said early signs would manifest as name confusion and minor memory lapses. "This confirms the diagnosis timeline. Stay close. Document everything." I read it twice, then forwarded it to Vernon with no comment. His response came 30 seconds later. They took the bait. That evening, Vernon showed me the full transcripts Ronan had pulled from Margot's phone calls. She'd contacted Dr. Wolf within an hour of hearing about my confusion, asking him to prepare a supplemental evaluation documenting the progression. "She's moving up the timeline," Vernon said quietly. "She thinks you're deteriorating faster than planned." Margot swept into my office that Saturday afternoon wearing the expression I'd seen her practice in mirrors as a teenager, concerned. "Daughter." Perfectly calibrated worry lines. Oscar-worthy performance. Her accelerated timeline meant she needed more evidence, and I was about to give it to her.
Mom, people are talking, she said, settling into the chair across from my desk with practiced ease.
They say you called Simone the wrong name. I'm worried about you. I looked up from the quarterly reports spread before me, letting surprise cross my face. It was nothing, sweetheart. Just a slip of the tongue.
But it's not just that, is it?
Margot leaned forward, her tone gentle, probing. I've noticed you seem tired lately, distracted.
Has this happened with other names? Other things you've forgotten?
She was documenting symptoms, building a case, each question designed to elicit admissions she could use in court. I played along. Well, I suppose I've had a lot on my mind with the Henderson acquisition. You know how these big deals get.
When did you last see a doctor? Margot asked.
For a real checkup, I mean, not just the annual physical.
I'm fine.
Margot. It was one name.
Her purse sat on the edge of my desk, positioned just so, in the polished surface of the mahogany. I caught the faint glow of a phone screen, the telltale red recording indicator.
She was collecting audio evidence of my confusion to support the conservatorship filing. I let the discovery fuel my performance. Has Sterling mentioned anything? I asked, as if suddenly uncertain. About the board meeting? Margot's eyes sharpened. What about the board meeting?
The date, I said, allowing a small frown. It's Tuesday, isn't it? Or Thursday?
Wednesday, Mom, Margot said softly. It's always been Wednesdays. For 20 years. I'd given birth to this woman, nursed her through fevers, taught her to read, and now I was teaching her how easy I'd be to destroy.
Of course, I said with a small, embarrassed laugh.
Wednesday. I don't know where my head is these days. That's what I'm worried about, Margot said. And I heard the satisfaction beneath the concern.
She thought she was watching me unravel. Have you been sleeping well? Not particularly, I admitted.
True enough, I'd been up until 2 a.m. most nights coordinating with Vernon and Ronan. The stress of the expansion, I suppose. Maybe you should consider stepping back a bit, Margot suggested, her voice honey-sweet.
Let me take on more of the day-to-day operations.
You've earned a break. There it was, the trap, dressed as filial devotion. I'll think about it, I said vaguely. Then, as if trying to anchor myself in routine business, remind me who's handling the Meridian contracts? Is that Gerard? No, that's not right. Gerald retired 3 years ago, Mom, Margot said gently. It's Marcus Brennan now. You hired him yourself. Marcus. Yes. I pressed my fingers to my temple. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I really am just tired. We were two actresses on the same stage, performing different plays, each certain the other was fooled. Margot stayed another 20 minutes, each question a probe, each of my calculated slips feeding her certainty. I watched her mental checklist being ticked off. Memory lapses, date confusion, difficulty with names, fatigue. All the early markers Dr. Wolf had fabricated in his fake evaluation. When she finally stood to leave, she came around the desk and hugged me. The embrace felt genuine enough that for a moment I remembered her at 7, at 12, at 20. All the versions of my daughter I'd loved before she'd decided to destroy me. I'll take care of everything, Mom, she whispered against my shoulder. You won't have to worry about the business much longer. The threat disguised as comfort made my blood run cold, but I held her tighter and murmured, "Thank you, sweetheart," after she left. I sat very still for 5 minutes, letting the rage settle back into calculation. Vernon arrived an hour later with security footage and Ronan's intercept. She called Sterling from the parking garage, he said, pulling up the transcript. Margot's message. It's worse than Wolf thought. We need to move now. Sterling's reply arrived 10 seconds later. Filing Monday. I'll call the judge. I called Margot Sunday morning with the tremor I'd been practicing in my voice, telling her I needed to discuss something urgent before I lost my nerve. The perfect bait for a predator who thought her prey was weakening. She arrived within the hour, concern painted across her face like theater makeup. What is it, Mom? She asked, settling into the chair where she'd sat yesterday. I let my hands shake slightly as I pushed a folder across the desk. The Piedmont Building renovation proposals. environmental assessments, structural engineering reports, legitimate documents for a property worth $28 million. I'm scared, sweetheart, I said, my voice unsteady. These reports on the Piedmont Building environmental assessments, structural requirements, I can't keep it all straight anymore. Margot opened the folder, scanning the technical language. What are you saying, Mom? I've been trying to manage the renovation planning, but every time I look at these reports, they feel overwhelming. Phase 2 contamination assessments, historic preservation guidelines, zoning variances. I pressed my fingers to my temple. I used to handle projects like this in my sleep. You're just tired, Margot said, but I heard the calculation beneath her words. I think I need to simplify, I said slowly. The Piedmont building, it's too much. I think I need to let it go. Margot's eyes sharpened. Prime financial district location, historic designation, renovation permits secured, a trophy property. What do you mean, let it go? She asked carefully. Sell it, I said. But I don't want some developer to tear out the architectural details. I could sell it to you directly. Keep it in the family. You and Sterling could manage the renovation. I was dangling the hook in clear water, and she was too hungry to notice the barb. Mom, that's a huge asset, Margot said. Are you sure you want to let it go? The appraisal came in at $28 million, I said, pulling out the document. But for you, for family, I'd sell it for $24 million, just to know it's in good hands. $4 million discount, enough to make the deal irresistible, enough to blind her to questions she should be asking. Margot studied the appraisal, and I watched the numbers calculate behind her eyes. Even with renovation overruns, she'd clear millions once the building was leased. I just can't handle the complexity anymore, I continued, letting my voice crack. The environmental reports alone, subsurface investigations, contamination remediation protocols, it's too much. I trust you to handle it properly. Have you talked to Vernon about this? Margot asked, her hand already resting possessively on the folder. Vernon thinks I should take my time, I said. But I've made up my mind. I need to simplify my life before things get worse. For one moment, I saw the daughter I'd raised. Then greed shuttered her eyes, and the stranger returned. When could we close? Margot asked. The question came too fast, too eager. She'd forgotten to ask about my health first. This week, I said. I've already had the paperwork drafted. Vernon can finalize it Monday or Tuesday. That quickly. I don't want to overthink it, I said firmly. I've made the decision. The longer I wait, the more confused I'll get. Margot stood, clutching the folder like a prize. Let me talk to Sterling. But yes, Mom, yes, we'll take care of the building for you. She hugged me before she left, and this time there was genuine warmth in it. The warmth of someone who'd just been handed a fortune. After she left, Vernon entered from the adjoining conference room where he'd watched through the two-way mirror. She didn't even ask about the environmental reports, he said quietly. Didn't question why you're suddenly incompetent to handle renovations you've done 100 times. He paused, something like awe in his expression. She wanted it too badly to think. Ronan sent the audio file at 8:47 p.m. Live feed from the listening device he'd planted in Sterling and Margot's home office 3 days earlier. Vernon and I settled in my office to listen to my daughter celebrate her victory. She practically begged me to take it. Margot's voice came through crisp and clear. Said she can't handle the complexity anymore. The Piedmont building, Sterling, $28 million worth for 24. $4 million discount, Sterling said, and I heard the hunger in his voice. But if we use company guarantees for financing, the board will ask questions. Why is she selling below value? Why to you specifically? Because she's losing it, Margot said flatly, which is exactly why we need to accelerate the conservatorship filing. If we wait too long, someone else might notice Mom's declining and try to intervene. We need legal control before anyone else gets protective. The mask had dropped completely. Her urgency wasn't about helping me. It was about eliminating competition for control. Call your father, Margot continued. He'll know how to structure this without board oversight. Then Sterling's voice on speakerphone. Dad, we need advice on a private real estate acquisition. Clifford Thornton's voice filled the recording, Sterling's father.
The financial strategist who'd spent 40 years teaching clients how to hide wealth through aggressive tax avoidance and creative
Corporate structures. I'd met him twice at family dinners, both times leaving with the impression he'd taught his son that wealth had no ethics.
How private? Clifford asked. Very, Sterling said. Margot's mother is selling the Piedmont building for $24 million, 4 below appraisal. But any corporate involvement triggers board questions.
Vernon and I listened in my office. Hearing my daughter plot to mortgage her future on a foundation of asbestos and lies.
Mortgage the house, Clifford said without hesitation.
Private transaction, no board oversight, no questions about why Celeste is selling below value. You keep 100% of the profit.
We'd be leveraging everything we own, Sterling said slowly.
Before I tell you what Clifford advised them to do next, if you're still here, comment whether greed or fear is driving their choice. And tell me why in one sentence. Please note, what follows contains dramatized details for narrative impact. The core lesson is what I hope resonates. For a guaranteed $4 million profit, Clifford continued, plus whatever the renovation adds in value. This is the opportunity you've been waiting for. Use a shell company as guarantor to keep it off your personal records initially. Then restructure after closing.
The shell company from the embezzlement? Margot asked.
Perfect. It's already established. Already has your authorizations. Channel the mortgage through Sterling Brand Consulting, then funnel it to the building purchase, clean and private.
Clifford called it a generational wealth opportunity.
When can you close? Clifford asked.
Mom said this week, Margot replied.
I'm thinking we do it simultaneously with the conservatorship filing, Tuesday or Wednesday.
Smart, Clifford said, and I heard the pride in his voice.
Once you have legal control through the conservatorship, you can funnel company resources into the renovation without anyone questioning it. The building becomes your personal project, funded by corporate capital. Sterling laughed. Steal from her to buy from her, then steal from her again to improve it.
That's not stealing, Clifford corrected smoothly.
That's strategic asset reallocation by a concerned daughter managing her incompetent mother's declining empire. The recording continued for another 10 minutes. Logistics, timeline, attorney contacts. Then Margot's laughter, bright and victorious. Vernon stopped the playback and looked at me, his expression caught between disgust and awe.
They're going to put their entire net worth house, savings,
everything into a building with $12 million in undisclosed asbestos remediation costs, he said quietly.
I nodded slowly.
And they'll sign the papers before they find out.
Ronan's alert came through at 2:17 p.m. Monday afternoon. Wolf calling Margot. Live intercept running now.
While my daughter and Sterling rushed to mortgage their future on a contaminated building, their co-conspirator was falling apart. I put Ronan on speaker. Vernon leaned forward as Dr. Wolf's voice filled my office. Dr. Wolf's cells tight with barely controlled panic.
We need to talk, Wolf said without preamble. My bank flagged the wire transfer. Compliance department is asking questions.
What kind of questions?
Margot's voice was cold, controlled. Why a real estate developer paid me 6 figures. They want documentation of services rendered. If they dig deeper, they'll find the evaluation, the diagnosis.
Wolf's breath came fast, shallow.
If they contact the medical board, they'll see my license status.
You provided legitimate consulting services, Margot said, ice in every word. Medical expertise, that's all anyone needs to know.
But I can't prove that without admitting I wrote a neurological assessment while suspended from practice, Wolf said.
This isn't like last time.
Last time.
The last time I did something like this. The patient's family settled quietly, paid me to go away. This is different. Your mother's a public figure. The amount is larger. There's more scrutiny. Wolf had done this before, created fraudulent diagnoses for families who wanted their wealthy relatives declared incompetent. A criminal pattern. Captured on recording. Listening to Wolf's fear. I felt nothing this man had tried to destroy my mind on paper for money. You need to calm down, Margot said.
The bank will close their review when you provide documentation showing you consulted on commercial real estate medical assessments, environmental health impacts, that sort of thing. You've done that work before, haven't you? Yes, but then document it, bill it properly, stop being paranoid. Paranoid? Wolf's voice pitched higher. I falsified medical records for you. If this unravels... If you panic and run. Margot interrupted, her tone sharp as a blade. I'll tell investigators you extorted us with a fake diagnosis scheme. That you approached Sterling claiming my mother was incompetent and offering to provide medical documentation for a price. Silence on the line.
Who do you think they'll believe? Margot continued.
A suspended doctor with a history of insurance fraud. Or a concerned daughter trying to protect her mother from a predatory physician. You're threatening me, Wolf said quietly. I'm clarifying consequences, Margot replied. You accepted payment for services. If you honor the agreement, this ends well for everyone. If you break... I understand, Wolf said, defeated. I won't talk to anyone. Good. Now lose this number. Don't call me again unless I contact you first.
Margot called him disposable after she hung up.
Ronan's intercept continued recording. We heard Margot's next call, immediately Sterling's number. Wolf's getting nervous, she said without greeting. The bank's asking questions about the payment. He's terrified of investigation.
How nervous? Sterling asked.
Panicking. We need to file today before he falls apart completely. The conservatorship petition. Yes, if Wolf breaks before we have legal control, this whole thing collapses. File it this afternoon.
I don't care if the paperwork isn't perfect. Get it to the courthouse before 5.
What about the building closing?
Tomorrow, Margot said.
The mortgage clears tonight. We close on the Piedmont in the morning. Petition gets reviewed Wednesday. By end of week, we control everything. The line went dead. Vernon stopped the playback and looked at me. We'd been listening from my office, watching my daughter's conspiracy fracture under pressure. This is confession, conspiracy, witness intimidation, fraud, everything, Vernon said quietly. He played it again from the beginning. Wolf's panic and Margot's threats crystallizing into prosecutable evidence. And now we own Wolf, Vernon continued. When you're ready, he'll testify to anything we need. I smiled, the expression cold and satisfied.
Not yet, I said. Let him suffer a little longer.
The closing took place in a private investment firm's conference room in Boston's financial district. And Vernon had Ronan plant a camera in the ceiling vent the night before. While Wolf suffered through his compromised silence, my daughter and her co-conspirators gathered to mortgage their futures. I watched the live feed from my office as Margot, Sterling, and Clifford entered the room. A lender's attorney already sat at the table, documents stacked precisely before him. The loan agreement is straightforward, the attorney began, sliding papers across the polished mahogany. $24 million at 8.5% annual interest, 5-year term. Sterling Brand Consulting, LLC as primary borrower. With your primary residence at, he checked the address, as collateral. The building's worth $28 million, Clifford said smoothly. You'll clear $4 million even if you sold it tomorrow. The attorney continued, clinical and precise. The personal guarantee means if Sterling Brand Consulting defaults, your primary residence becomes collateral. You'll also need to sign individual liability waivers removing corporate protection. Sterling hesitated, pen hovering over the signature line. We're putting everything on the line. Standard language for this type of private financing, Clifford said. You're buying a premium asset at a discount. Some risk is expected. The attorney turned to page 32. Environmental due diligence is buyer's responsibility post-closing. The seller has provided existing assessments, but any remediation costs discovered after transfer become the buyer's obligation. Margot waved it off without even reading the clause. My mother's company already cleared all that. The building's been in Harrington ownership for 15 years. We know its history. She'd never ordered an independent inspection, never questioned why I was selling, never wondered if the trap was too obvious. Watching the feed from my office, I saw my daughter sign away her future with the same confident flourish she'd used on childhood permission slips. Margot, Sterling said quietly, maybe we should take a day to review. We sign now, or spend the rest of our lives under my mother's thumb. Margot interrupted, her voice sharp. This is our way out. Financial independence. Sterling, isn't that what you wanted?
Clifford slid the pen across the table toward his son. Generational wealth doesn't come without risk.
Your mother-in-law gave you a gift. Accept it. Sterling picked up the pen. They signed one document after another. Loan agreement, mortgage papers, personal guarantees stripping every protection.
Purchase contract transferring ownership of the Piedmont building with its hidden $12 million contamination liability.
Directly to their over-leveraged shell company. The attorney initialed page 47 asbestos disclosure waiver. I watched Margot sign it without reading. Watched Sterling add his signature beside hers. Watched Clifford witness both, sealing their doom with his practiced scrawl.
Once the conservatorship goes through, Sterling said, closing the final folder, we can funnel company resources into renovation and triple our money.
Exactly, Clifford said, standing to shake the attorney's hand.
The real play isn't the building, it's controlling the Harrington capital for remediation.
Once you have legal authority through the conservatorship, the $24 million loan becomes just bridge financing. You'll repay it from your mother-in-law's company funds.
Margot smiled.
She'll be paying for our independence without even knowing it. The attorney packed his briefcase, left the room.
A paralegal brought champagne, apparently standard for closings at this particular firm.
Clifford raised his glass. To brilliant financial strategy.
To freedom, Margot said.
To us, Sterling added. They clinked crystal, laughing, confident they'd just executed the deal of their lives. Vernon froze the video feed on that final frame, all three conspirators, champagne glasses raised, toasting their brilliant financial maneuver. The timestamp in the corner read 11:47 a.m., May 27, 2026. I checked my watch. The comprehensive environmental inspection report I'd commissioned 3 weeks ago documenting every square foot of asbestos, insulation, every contaminated pipe. Every remediation cost down to the dollar would be delivered to the city's building department in 13 minutes. Public record. Permanent. Destroying the building's value the moment it hit the system. Ronan's parking lot microphone caught Sterling before he'd even reached the car. Something about this feels wrong. 13 minutes had passed. The environmental report was posting to public record while my son-in-law stood in a Boston parking lot. His instinct finally screaming warnings his greed had silenced. Cold feet? Clifford asked, unlocking the Mercedes. Not cold feet, Sterling said slowly. Logic. Why would she sell a $28 million building for $24? Even confused, someone on her staff would stop that. Vernon would stop it. Vernon tried, Clifford said smoothly. Margot told you. He advised Celeste to wait, but she overruled him. That's what decline looks like, poor judgment overriding good counsel. Sterling leaned against the car, arms crossed. Vernon and I listened from my office as doubt crystallized in his voice. I Googled early onset dementia symptoms last night, Sterling said. Celeste's behavior doesn't quite match. She's confused about small things, names, dates, minor details. But she's razor sharp on the big picture. The Piedmont sale, the family trust restructuring. Those are complex decisions she's making perfectly. He'd noticed the inconsistencies in my performance. The predator had sensed the trap even if he couldn't see its shape. You're second-guessing at the finish line, Clifford said, his tone sharpening. That's how you lose. What if she's playing us? Sterling asked. What if this whole confused act is what some elaborate scheme to sell you a valuable building at a discount? Clifford laughed, harsh and dismissive. Listen to yourself. Listening to Sterling's doubt. I almost felt pity. Almost. Until I remembered the locked room at Whispering Pines he'd reserved for me. The papers are signed, Clifford continued, pressing his advantage. You want to walk away after mortgaging everything? Your house, your company, your personal guarantee? You've already committed. The only path is forward. But if we're wrong, you're not wrong. You're scared. There's a difference. Clifford put his hand on Sterling's shoulder. Father to son, mentor to student. I've been navigating deals like this for 30 years. Trust me. Sterling was silent, doubt wrestling with paternal authority.
By Friday, you'll have legal control of her entire empire through the conservatorship, Clifford said. Even if the building has problems, which it doesn't, you'll have access to $300 million in Harrington assets to solve it.
You're not vulnerable. You're positioned. Clifford said, "What they owe us," like it was doctrine. "What they owe us," Sterling repeated.
The Harringtons, Clifford said, and I heard decades of resentment in his voice.
"I told you when you married into that family, we'd find a way to get what they owe us. Your grandfather lost his commercial real estate firm when Celeste Harrington undercut his bids in the 90s, destroyed him through pure market aggression. This isn't just about money, Sterling. It's about balance." The conspiracy predated Margot's greed. Clifford had seeded this the moment Sterling met my daughter. Patient and calculating, waiting years for the perfect opening.
"You've been planning this since the beginning," Sterling said slowly.
"I've been preparing you for opportunity," Clifford corrected. "And when Margot came to us about her mother's decline, real or performed, I saw the path forward. Now we're here. Don't lose your nerve when we're 3 days from total victory." Sterling looked at the building where they'd just signed away everything they owned. Then he got in the car, doubt visibly suppressed beneath his father's overwhelming certainty. Vernon stopped the audio playback and pulled up another window on his screen. The City Building Department's Public Records Portal. He refreshed it once, twice. The Piedmont Environmental Assessment Report appeared. Timestamp 12 p.m., May 27, 2026. Public record, permanent.
"How long until they see it?" I asked.
Vernon checked his watch. Their bank's automated monitoring system scans public records every hour for properties securing active loans. It'll flag the contamination report in about 40 minutes. Vernon laid the federal environmental assessment on his desk the next morning. 247 pages that reduced my daughter's financial future to a single number: $28 million. The bank's automated system had flagged the contamination 43 minutes after the report posted. By dawn, Margot and Sterling's trap had closed. "EPA classification is comprehensive," Vernon said, turning to the executive summary. "Asbestos in walls, ceiling tiles, pipe insulation, flooring adhesive, all 12 floors. Federal law mandates complete professional abatement before any renovation work or occupancy expansion." I scanned the remediation cost breakdown. Containment protocols, licensed abatement contractors, disposal at approved facilities, post-removal air quality certification. The numbers climbed page after page. "Total cleanup cost?" I asked, though I already knew. $28 million, Vernon said. "The building appraises at $28 million clean. Remediation cost $28 million. Net value, $0. They paid $24 million for a liability," I said. "Worse, they mortgaged their house and personally guaranteed a loan for something actively destroying value. Every month they hold it. Carrying costs compound the loss." I turned to the report's cover page, dated September 12, 2025, 8 months ago. "I commissioned this before I acquired the building," I said quietly. "Before I took ownership. I knew exactly what I was buying." Vernon nodded. "You purchased a toxic asset specifically to weaponize it. The Piedmont building wasn't an investment. It was ammunition. I'd built an empire creating value from nothing. This was its mirror, creating nothing from greed." "When will their lenders see the report?" I asked. "Already did," Vernon said. "Sterling received a margin call at 6:47 this morning. The loan agreement includes standard provisions for material adverse changes in collateral value. They have 48 hours to provide additional collateral equal to 50% of the loan value, or the entire balance accelerates to immediate payment. $12 million in additional collateral." I calculated. "Within 2 days." "They have no additional collateral," Vernon said. "Everything they own is already pledged. The house secures the primary loan. Sterling Brand Consulting is the guarantor. Richard's shell company structure stripped away corporate protection. They're personally, individually liable." The legal mechanics were elegant. As deed holders, Margot and Sterling owned the contamination liability the moment they signed. Discovery timing was irrelevant. The remediation obligation transferred with the property.
Can they walk away? I asked. Abandon the building? Let the lender foreclose?
Not without triggering the personal guarantee, Vernon said. The loan documents hold them liable for any deficiency between the foreclosure sale price and the outstanding balance. The building will sell for pennies on remediation liability alone. They'd still owe $23 million plus. Vernon called it mathematically elegant revenge. There's one more detail, he said, turning to the final section of the EPA report. The disclosure clause. I read it carefully. The previous owner, Harrington Enterprises, had explicitly notified the buyer in writing of known environmental contamination prior to closing, as required by federal and state law. Documentation attached. The disclosure was in the closing packet, Vernon explained. Page 47, marked for buyer acknowledgement. Margot signed the waiver without reading it. Her signature was there, confident and bold, next to the clause that read, buyer acknowledges receipt of environmental disclosure documents and voluntarily waives independent inspection, accepting property in as-is condition with full knowledge of contamination status. She'd signed away her last legal escape route. They can't claim fraud, Vernon said quietly. Can't argue you concealed material facts. The disclosure was explicit. She chose not to read it. My phone buzzed on Vernon's desk. Margot's name lit the screen. First call in 3 days. Vernon raised an eyebrow. She knows. I let it ring once. Twice. Savoring the moment before the confrontation. Then I answered, my voice warm and slightly confused. Hello, sweetheart. Is something wrong? Vernon's office became a war room over 48 hours. 3 walls covered in printed timelines, financial flows, and surveillance transcripts while Ronan built the digital archive that would destroy my daughter. Margot's desperate phone call had been brief panic about the environmental report, begging for help understanding the remediation costs. I'd played confused, sympathetic, useless. By the time she hung up, her desperation had calcified into something harder. Now we compiled the evidence that would end her. Ronan stood at the main wall, pointing to the surveillance timeline. 16 recorded conversations documenting conspiracy planning. 412 emails between Margot, Sterling, Clifford, and Dr. Wolf. 6 wire transfers totaling $200,000 to co-conspirators. The conservatorship petition alone is fraud, conspiracy, and elder abuse, Vernon said, cross-referencing dates on the legal timeline. Everything else is gilding. Simone reviewed the media strategy documents, her communications expertise turning evidence into narrative. When this breaks, every major outlet will cover it. Family dynasty betrayal, medical fraud, embezzlement, it has every element. We control the narrative from minute one. I watched them work with the efficiency of people who'd been preparing for war. Because they had been. Longer than I'd realized. Vernon, I said carefully, when did you start coordinating with federal prosecutors? He looked up from the evidence logs. 6 weeks ago. The day after you told me about the medical diagnosis photograph. 6 weeks, I repeated. You've been building a federal case this entire time. The counteroffensive wasn't just about revenge, Vernon said. On financial ruin doesn't guarantee consequences for people with family resources and expensive attorneys. Prison does. I designed every step to meet federal prosecution standards, RICO conspiracy, wire fraud, elder abuse under federal statutes. This doesn't end with them broke, Celeste. It ends with them in custody. Watching the evidence wall grow, I felt the weight of what I'd built, not just a case, but the end of my daughter's freedom. Federal prosecutors are ready to move the moment we signal, Vernon continued, pulling up coordination emails. The shareholder meeting is Monday, June 2nd. Maximum corporate and media exposure. We present the evidence publicly. Prosecutors file charges within hours. 3 days, I said. They have 3 days to destroy themselves further. Their desperation is accelerating. Ronan added, monitoring real-time surveillance feeds. Sterling contacted 4 different equity firms today. All rejected the Piedmont refinancing. They're running out of options, running out of time. Every document was chain of custody certified. every recording legally obtained or anonymously sourced through proper channels. Ronan had created redundant encrypted backups stored in 3 separate secure locations. The evidence package is federal grade, Vernon said. Authenticated, time-stamped, cross-referenced. It's not just comprehensive, it's prosecutable. We'd constructed a perfect cage from their own greed, and Monday, I'd spring the door shut. There's one more element, Vernon said, pulling up a separate evidence folder. Clifford Thornton's involvement. The timeline traced back 15 years. A commercial real estate deal in 2011 where Celeste Harrington had outbid Clifford's development firm for a premium downtown property. His company had collapsed 6 months later. The grudge had festered for over a decade. His entire conspiracy was revenge-motivated, Vernon explained. He didn't just help Sterling and Margot, he engineered the opportunity, seeded the plan, provided the infrastructure, the shell company, the offshore accounts, even the connection to Dr. Wolf through his disbarred sister. It's premeditated across multiple felonies spanning years. So when the federal charges hit, I said slowly, they don't just hit Margot and Sterling. Clifford faces RICO conspiracy charges as the architect, Vernon confirmed. He's looking at 20 years minimum. Late Friday night, Ronan's monitoring system flagged unusual activity. An alert pulsed on his laptop screen. Margot and Sterling are at the Piedmont building, he said, pulling up the live security feed. With construction equipment. Vernon leaned forward, watching the grainy footage. Sterling and Margot in work clothes, crowbars and industrial masks, beginning to tear into contaminated walls. They're trying to start remediation themselves, Vernon said quietly. Without permits, without proper containment, without licensed contractors. EPA violations, criminal environmental negligence, compounding their exposure with every desperate action. I watched my daughter's desperation play out in real time. Let them dig deeper. I stood before my bedroom mirror at dawn on June 2nd, deliberately choosing the loose gray suit that made me look diminished. The woman I'd been pretending to be for 2 weeks today, for the last time. Friday night's surveillance had shown Margot and Sterling's desperation in real time, tearing into contaminated walls without permits or protection. By Saturday, EPA inspectors would cite them for violations. But this morning, I had a different performance to deliver. The suit hung loose where it had been tailored. I'd deliberately lost 8 pounds over 2 weeks to sell the decline. Each skipped meal an investment in the disguise. Minimal makeup emphasized the shadows under my eyes, real enough from sleepless nights spent building this trap. I left my hair slightly disheveled, the careful disorder of someone who'd forgotten how to care. In the bathroom, I found the pill bottles Margot had left during her visits, supposed supplements, brain health vitamins, memory support. I'd had them tested after the second bottle appeared mild sedatives, carefully dosed to increase confusion without triggering alarm. She'd been chemically reinforcing her narrative for weeks. I'd been disposing of every pill, replacing them with look-alike vitamins, letting her think the medications were working, while I stayed sharp enough to destroy her. One more performance, then they see who you really are. I practiced in the mirror, the hesitant gesture, hand trembling slightly as I reached for things. The moment of confusion before answering questions. The apologetic smile when I lost a train of thought. 2 weeks of rehearsal had made the performance instinctive. By noon, every shareholder would know the truth. The disguise felt like armor now, protection against the moment when I'd have to watch my daughter's world collapse. The doorbell interrupted my preparation. 7:15 in the morning, unexpected. Ivy stood on the doorstep with her nanny, backpack already on for school, holding a folded piece of construction paper. "Grandma!" She ran to me, and I knelt to catch her hug. "I made you something for your big meeting today." Her nanny smiled apologetically. "She insisted on stopping by before school, said you needed this." Ivy pressed the drawing into my hands, her 8-year-old face serious with importance. "Mommy said you might be too tired for your meeting, but I know you're strong. Grandma." I unfolded the paper carefully. 3 figures drawn in bright crayon. A small girl labeled Ivy, a tall woman labeled Grandma, and between them, a crude cage containing stick figures. The label above the cage, in careful child handwriting, "Bad People." "This is beautiful, sweetheart," I managed, my voice tight. "The bad people tried to trick you," Ivy whispered, leaning close. "But you're too smart. You can see through tricks, right?" She'd processed the adult conspiracy through the absolute moral clarity only children possess. Her mother belonged in that cage, and somewhere in her innocent understanding, she knew it. "Thank you," I said, pulling her close. "This picture is perfect." "Don't let them make you go away, okay?" Ivy whispered against my shoulder. "I need you here." Ivy's trust was the reason I'd built this trap, not revenge, but showing her that strength meant protecting what mattered. After they left, I stood in the quiet brownstone, Ivy's drawing in my hands. The child had drawn me tall, strong, standing between her and the cage, not confused, not diminished, exactly who I'd always been. I pinned her drawing to my briefcase, the one containing the federal evidence package. 247 pages of environmental assessment, 16 surveillance recordings, 412 emails, 6 wire transfers documenting conspiracy. My phone rang. Vernon. "Shareholders are arriving early," he said. "Margot and Sterling just entered the building. They don't know yet." I checked my appearance one final time. The confused old woman stared back from the mirror, frightened and frail. The disguise was perfect. "Let's go end this." The boardroom fell silent at precisely 10:30 when I entered with Vernon's steadying hand on my elbow, playing frail so convincingly that Margot's smile flickered with premature victory. I'd arrived at headquarters ready to end the conspiracy. Now came the final performance before the revelation. I took my seat at the head of the table with careful, uncertain movements. 20 board members watched with varying degrees of concern. They'd noticed my confusion in recent weeks, the planted evidence of decline doing its work. Margot stood, her expression professionally compassionate. "I've called this special session because my mother's health requires immediate board action under Section 7(4) of the corporate bylaws." "What section?" I asked, with practiced confusion. "Margot, I don't understand why we're—" "It's okay, Mom," she said gently, and I saw several board members exchange worried glances. "Sterling, please distribute the materials." Sterling moved around the table, placing thick packets before each member, medical letterhead visible on top. "Dr. Wolf's falsified diagnosis." The emergency proxy clause I'd written 20 years ago, now weaponized against me. The board chair, Margaret Hensley, opened her packet carefully. "Ms. Harrington, perhaps you should let your daughter explain." I nodded with manufactured uncertainty, sinking slightly into my chair. Margot's presentation was masterful. She walked them through Dr. Cole's evaluation, pointing to specific cognitive decline markers, memory lapses, confusion, poor judgment. She referenced the Sandra incident, meetings I'd allegedly forgotten, decisions that seemed increasingly erratic. Clifford Thornton stood from his guest chair. "If I may, as someone with relevant expertise. Mr. Thornton is here representing the medical consultation firm we retained for a second opinion," Sterling explained smoothly. "He's arranged for Dr. Eleanor Morrison, another neurologist, to independently verify the diagnosis." 2 doctors. They'd bought 2 physicians, not one. The conspiracy ran deeper than I documented. Clifford continued. "Dr. Morrison's evaluation, completed independently, corroborates Dr. Wolf's findings completely. The cognitive impairment is progressive and materially affects Ms. Harrington's judgment in complex financial matters." Watching my daughter perform grief over my decline, I almost believed her she'd learned to lie from someone, maybe from me. Margot's voice cracked with practiced emotion. "I love my mother too much to watch her destroy what she built through no fault of her own. The confusion is getting worse. Last week, she called Simone by the wrong name in front of staff. She's been forgetting board meeting schedules, questioning decisions she made herself days earlier." Sterling stepped forward, his tone measured and concerned. "Dr. Wolf's evaluation is conclusive. Ms. Harrington requires immediate medical proxy activation under the emergency governance provisions." 3 board members were crying. Margot walked to my chair, placing her hand on my shoulder in a gesture of tender protection that made my skin crawl. I'm asking the board to protect her from herself before it's too late. The company needs stable leadership. My mother deserves dignity in her decline, not the humiliation of public mistakes. Her voice dropped to intimate confession. My daughter, your granddaughter Ivy, asks me every day if Grandma is okay. I need to tell her we're protecting you, that you'll be safe and cared for. Weaponizing an 8-year-old's love as manipulation, the ultimate maternal betrayal, delivered with perfect, tearful sincerity.
The proxy transfer is temporary,
Margot continued, addressing the board. Just until Mom's health stabilizes. I'll manage daily operations. Sterling will handle financial oversight. Everything stays in family control. We're not removing her, we're protecting her legacy. Sterling distributed the proxy transfer documents, signature lines already flagged. Margot finished, letting silence carry the weight of manufactured emotion. Board members studied the medical evaluations, the corporate bylaws, my carefully constructed confusion of the past 2 weeks. Margaret Hensley, the board chair, turned to me with genuine compassion. Ms. Harrington, do you have anything to say before we vote? I looked at my daughter's confident face, Sterling's satisfied smirk, Clifford's predatory anticipation. 12 board members waiting for confused rambling that would seal their decision. Vernon placed the federal evidence package on the table. 247 pages of environmental assessment, 16 surveillance recordings, 412 emails, 6 wire transfers, complete documented conspiracy. Actually, I said, my voice suddenly clear and sharp as glass, I have quite a lot to say. The confusion I'd worn for 2 weeks fell away like a costume as I straightened in my chair. And Margot's face shifted from confidence to the first flicker of fear. My voice, suddenly clear and commanding, cut through the manufactured emotion she'd just performed. My cognitive function is perfect, I said, each word precise and deliberate. It's always been perfect. What you just witnessed was theater designed to expose fraud. The board stared. Margot's mouth opened, closed. Mother, what are you? This is confusion itself. I called Simone the wrong name deliberately. I continued, ignoring her stammering. I forgot meetings strategically. I hesitated over dates I knew perfectly well. Every mistake was bait. Margot, and you swallowed it whole. Sterling stood. This is absurd. The medical evaluation is legitimate. The medical evaluation is fraud, I said flatly. Doctor. Desmond Wolfe was paid $120,000 to fabricate a diagnosis. His medical license is suspended for previous insurance fraud. He's never conducted a legitimate neurological assessment in his life. You're confused about the timeline, Margot tried, still performing concern. Mom, this is exactly the kind of... I commissioned my own evaluation 2 weeks ago, I said, turning to the board. Johns Hopkins Medical Center, Dr. Patricia Yao, Chief of Neurology. Complete cognitive assessment. The results are in your board packet. Appendix Z. Perfect cognitive function across every metric. Margaret Hensley flipped frantically through her packet, found Appendix Z. Her face went pale reading the Hopkins letterhead. The comprehensive evaluation showing 0 impairment. No one read it, I said quietly. You trusted the family presentation. That's what conspirators count on, trust overriding verification. Watching comprehension dawn on Margot's face the moment she understood I'd been hunting her all along almost broke my heart. I pressed the concealed button Vernon had installed under the conference table. The boardroom doors opened. 2 FBI agents entered, badges visible. Between them walked Dr. Desmond Wolfe, pale and defeated, hands trembling. Dr. Wolfe has something to tell you, I said. Wolfe's voice broke. I falsified the evaluation. Ms. Harrington never exhibited any cognitive impairment. I was paid to create a diagnosis that didn't exist. The board sat frozen. How much? Margaret asked quietly. $120,000, Wolfe whispered. Wire transfer from Sterling Brand Consulting, LLC to my personal account. April 2nd. The FBI agent stepped forward. Doctor, Wolfe is cooperating with our investigation into conspiracy to commit fraud. elder abuse, and attempted embezzlement. He's provided complete documentation of the scheme. Sterling tried to run for the door. The second FBI agent moved to block him. "I'd stay, Mr. Thornton. We have questions." Clifford stood, trying to salvage something. The second evaluation I mentioned was independent. There was no second evaluation, Wolf said quietly. Mr. Thornton asked me to claim Dr. Morrison had corroborated my findings. She never examined Ms. Harrington. I lied under his instruction. Clifford's face went white. He'd just perjured himself in front of the board and federal agents. Dr. Morrison doesn't exist, Vernon added calmly. The name was fabricated. Medical board has no licensed neurologist by that name in Massachusetts. Margot sank into her chair, the performance finally collapsing. "This is entrapment," Sterling said desperately. "She set us up." "I exposed fraud," I corrected. "You committed it. There's a difference." Vernon opened the federal evidence folder, thick with tabs and exhibits. He pulled out the first-page surveillance photographs, high resolution, dated March 19, 2026. Margot touring Whispering Pines Memory Care Facility. The locked unit, the room with no windows. Her standing at the door, asking questions about visitation restrictions and phone access. "Your daughter selected your prison cell," Vernon said quietly, placing the photos before the board. "She inspected the facility personally, asked detailed questions about how to keep you isolated." Margot's face went white as bone. I looked at her, my voice steady despite the rage. "And that," I said, "is just page 1 of 47. The lead FBI agent stepped forward with handcuffs visible. And in that moment, Margot understood this wasn't theater or corporate politics. It was federal prosecution. 46 more pages of evidence sat waiting, but we'd reached the conclusion before the full presentation. "Sterling Thornton, Clifford Thornton," the agent said, voice flat and professional. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, and wire fraud. You have the right to remain silent." The handcuffs clicked closed on Sterling's wrists, then Clifford's. The sound echoed in the silent boardroom. "We had a business arrangement," Sterling said desperately. "This is a family matter, a misunderstanding." "The federal government disagrees," I said quietly. The second FBI agent addressed the board. "Ms. Harrington Sterling is named as an unindicted co-conspirator pending further investigation. She's currently a person of interest in the ongoing fraud case." Margot stood frozen, watching her husband and father-in-law in handcuffs. "For transparency," the lead agent continued, "the Bureau has been investigating this matter for 6 weeks at the request of Ms. Harrington's attorney. Every transaction, every meeting, every piece of evidence you'll see today was obtained under federal observation." 6 weeks! Vernon had brought in the FBI before I'd even offered Margot the building. The entire poisoned gift had been executed with federal agents watching, documenting, building the case that would guarantee prison time. Watching my daughter realize she'd lost everything, freedom, money, future, I felt no triumph. Only the hollow weight of necessary justice. Vernon pulled out another exhibit. Environmental assessment reports, loan documents, property transfer papers. "The Piedmont building," Vernon said to the board, "requires $28 million in asbestos remediation. Sterling and Margot purchased it for $24 million, using their primary residence as collateral through a personal shell. Company structure." He laid out the wire transfers, the mortgage documents, the personal guarantees. Their lender received the environmental report on May 27th, issued a margin call demanding $12 million in additional collateral within 48 hours. That deadline passed yesterday. Margot's voice broke. "You knew about the asbestos when you sold it to me." "I commissioned the environmental report 8 months ago," I said, "before I purchased the property. I bought a toxic asset specifically to expose your conspiracy. You waived disclosure review at closing. Your signature is on page 47 of the loan documents." Vernon continued with surgical precision. "The building has negative value. Net worth after remediation, 0. The loan, $24 million. The house pledged as collateral, valued at $3.2 million. Total personal exposure, approximately $21 million in deficiency after foreclosure." Margot's legs buckled. She caught herself on the conference table. Additionally, Vernon said, the loan agreement includes a criminal fraud clause. If the borrower is charged with criminal offenses related to the collateralized asset or the loan itself, the lender may seize all pledged assets immediately without foreclosure proceedings. He turned the page. Sterling was arrested this morning on federal fraud charges. The lender executed the fraud clause at 10:15 a.m. The house was seized 45 minutes ago. Margot looked at me with something beyond hatred. You destroyed your own daughter. The FBI agents moved toward the door, Sterling and Clifford in handcuffs between them. Board members sat in stunned silence, watching a corporate meeting transform into a perp walk. I stood, meeting Margot's eyes across the table. No, Margot, I said quietly. I stopped you from destroying my granddaughter. The boardroom door opened. FBI agents led Sterling and Clifford through it, past shocked shareholders gathering in the hallway, past Simone already managing the press statement, past the corporate empire Margot had tried to steal. The door closed. Margot stood alone in the boardroom, financially ruined, facing federal charges, her husband arrested, her co-conspirators exposed, her inheritance gone. The company she'd plotted to control would continue without her, stronger for having excised the rot. She'd lost everything. And somewhere in Boston, Ivy was safe. Margot caught me in the hallway outside the boardroom, mascara streaking her face. The polished executive dissolved into someone I almost didn't recognize. My daughter, terrified and broken. Sterling and Clifford were being processed for federal custody. Margot stood alone in her ruin. And now she'd found me. Please, Mom. Her voice cracked on the word. I know we were wrong. I'll confess. I'll plead guilty. Just help Sterling. His father pushed him into this. Clifford didn't push anyone, I said, my voice flat. Sterling chose fraud. You chose conspiracy. You're my mother. She grabbed my arm, fingers desperate. You have connections, influence with the prosecutors. You could make a call. To say what? That my daughter who planned to lock me in a memory facility deserves leniency. Margot's face crumbled. We were desperate, living in your shadow, never measuring up, watching you control everything. So you tried to steal it, I said quietly, with fraudulent medical documents and a locked room with no windows. We knew about the asbestos, she whispered suddenly. 2 weeks before we closed. Clifford's due diligence found it. But we thought, after the conservatorship, we could force Harrington Enterprises to pay for remediation as a family obligation. It was stupid, I know, but we were so close. Knowing fraud. She'd seen the contamination report, understood the liability, and signed anyway because she believed stolen power would let her shift the costs to my company. Another layer of calculated betrayal. Looking at my daughter's destroyed face, I understood this was the cost, not her freedom. But the moment I chose Ivy's future over Margot's redemption. If I save you now, I said carefully, I teach Ivy that family means protecting people who plan to lock their mothers in cages. What about forgiveness? Margot's voice broke. What about second chances? I gave you 60 years of chances. You used them to buy a prison cell with my birthday money. I'm your daughter, and Ivy is my granddaughter. She's 8 years old. Margot, 8. You were going to let her think her grandmother disappeared into a hospital where children can't visit? You were preparing her to accept my erasure from her life. Margot sank against the wall. I didn't think about it that way. That's the problem. You didn't think about her at all. Just the money, the power, the company you felt entitled to inherit without earning. When had I stopped being her mother and become her judge? The federal prosecutors offered me a deal, Margot said quietly, and something in her tone made me go still. Reduced charges if I testify against Sterling and Clifford. Full cooperation, detailed timeline, access to all communications. She was saving herself by sacrificing her husband and father-in-law. Even in ruin, her selfishness remained absolute. And you wanted my help negotiating that deal, I said slowly. Not saving Sterling, saving yourself. Margot looked away. I'm your mother, I said, not your accomplice. The prosecutors don't need my influence. They have 16 recorded conversations and 412 emails. Your testimony is redundant. They're offering you the deal because it's convenient, not because they need you. So I should refuse go to trial.
I'm not your lawyer, Margot. I'm not your strategist. I'm the woman you tried to imprison, and I'm done advising you.
I turned to walk away.
Margot grabbed my arm, fingers desperate. Don't you love me at all?
I looked at her hand, then her face. I love you enough to let you face what you've done. I pulled free and walked toward the elevator, my footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. Behind me, I heard Margot collapse against the wall, sobbing. Vernon waited by the elevator, his expression carefully neutral. The doors opened. We stepped inside.
Ivy's nanny just called, Vernon said quietly as the doors closed. She's asking if she can come stay with you tonight.
Vernon slid the FBI background report across his desk the next morning, and the first line told me everything. Subject, lost securities license in Delaware, 2019. Settlement with fraud victims totaling $340. 000. Ivy had stayed at my brownstone overnight, sleeping in the guest room that had been Margot's as a child.
Now, while she had breakfast with her nanny, I learned exactly who her father really was.
He operated as an unlicensed financial advisor, Vernon said, walking me through the report. Convinced 3 elderly clients to invest in non-existent hedge funds. Same playbook, fake documents, credential fraud, targeting trust. I scanned the victim statements, retirement accounts emptied, pensions diverted. Life savings evaporated into shell corporations that dissolved before authorities could freeze them.
Margot married a con artist and never knew, I said.
The FBI thinks she knew, Vernon said carefully. One of the Delaware victims was her college roommate's grandmother. The implications settled like ice in my chest. Margot had proximity to the fraud, connections to the victims, and still married Sterling 3 years later. He surrendered his license in the settlement, Vernon continued, agreed never to operate as a financial advisor in Delaware again. So he moved to Massachusetts. Changed his firm name from Sterling Financial to Sterling Brand Consulting, and presented himself to your daughter as a clean slate. The Delaware files included a victim impact statement from a widow named Eleanor Bradford. Her late husband's entire pension, $340,000, accumulated over 40 years of teaching, gone. She'd settled for 18 cents on the dollar, and 6 months later, stepped in front of a train. The death was ruled suicide, but never prosecuted as connected to Sterling's fraud. Just another casualty, documented but unpunished. I'd spent months wondering if I was too harsh. Now I understood I'd been protecting Ivy from a serial predator who'd targeted our family deliberately. He researched Harrington Enterprises before dating Margot, Vernon said, pulling up another section. LinkedIn searches, public filings, news articles about your business expansion. The FBI's timeline shows he engineered the introduction at a charity event where he knew she'd be. He married my daughter to rob me, I said quietly. And she was vulnerable enough to believe it was love, Vernon replied. By the time she understood his nature, Ivy existed, and divorce meant losing access to the wealth he'd married into. So she chose conspiracy over protecting her daughter from a predator. Vernon turned to the final section, the conspiracy timeline. Sterling brought the criminal expertise. The fake medical diagnosis scheme was identical to tactics he'd used in Delaware, falsified professional evaluations, corrupted credentials, manufactured documentation. Clifford's grudge against the Harrington family had provided motivation, but Sterling had provided the blueprint. Margot wasn't the mastermind. She was Sterling's mark, who'd become his accomplice. The Delaware widow's name was Eleanor. She'd been 63 years old when Sterling took everything. Her husband had died of cancer 2 years earlier. The pension was supposed to fund her retirement, her security, her dignity in old age. She'd lasted 6 months before the train. There's one more detail, Vernon said quietly. He pulled out a private investigator's report dated 7 years ago, 3 months before Margot's wedding. Margot had hired the PI herself. Thorough background check. The Delaware fraud was documented, victims named, settlement detailed. Everything was there.
She'd known. Before the wedding, before Ivy, before any of this, she'd known Sterling was a fraud and married him anyway. The PI's final note read, "Client expressed belief subject made mistakes due to poor guidance from senior partner. States subject has reformed and deserves second chance." She'd rationalized, justified, convinced herself the victims had exaggerated or Sterling had been led astray. She'd married a con artist with her eyes open, believing she could reform him or that his love for her would change his nature. Vernon closed the file. The federal prosecutor wants to add the Delaware case to the current charges. Pattern of fraud increases sentencing substantially. Sterling's looking at 15 to 20 years instead of 7 to 10. I nodded, processing the weight of it. "Does Margot know about the suicide?" I asked. Vernon's silence was answer enough. "She needs to know," I said. "She needs to understand exactly who she chose over her daughter." The foreclosure notice hit Margot's home on Thursday morning, 48 hours after Sterling's arrest. Exactly as the loan documents promised when fraud charges triggered the immediate seizure clause. I'd decided Margot would learn about Eleanor's suicide from her own attorney when the Delaware charges were added. Now I watched the financial devastation unfold in real time. Vernon tracked it from his office, monitoring court filings and asset freezes with clinical precision. The lender foreclosed on the house valued at $3.2 million. Sold at auction within days. Federal authorities froze all accounts tied to Sterling Brand Consulting and their personal assets. Credit cards canceled. Investment accounts liquidated to cover margin calls on the worthless Piedmont building. "The house sold this morning," Vernon said, reading the auction results. Lender recovered $18 million against the $24 million loan. They're still pursuing Sterling personally for the $6 million gap. "And Margot?" I asked. "Moved Ivy into a studio apartment in Quincy. She's applying for public defender representation." 72 hours. The financial empire Sterling had built to impress me evaporated in less time than it took to plan a wedding. The auction documents revealed one more betrayal. Sterling had taken a second mortgage Margot didn't know about, $800,000 borrowed against their home, 6 months ago, hidden in his personal accounts. He'd been gambling on the Piedmont deal before I'd even offered it, desperate enough to leverage everything on a scheme that hadn't yet materialized. His financial desperation had pre-existed the conspiracy. He'd married my daughter, already drowning, and used her trust to sink deeper, watching my daughter lose everything. I felt the weight of every choice, hers to betray me, mine to stop her. Both are failures to protect Ivy sooner. "I want to establish a trust for Ivy," I said, immediately, before Margot thinks to raid whatever assets she can reach. Vernon pulled up the estate planning documents we'd discussed. Irrevocable trust, $5 million principal. Independent trustee, I added. Someone Margot can't manipulate or guilt into releasing funds. Education and living expenses until Ivy turns 30. Vernon made notes. The document will specify that Margot cannot serve as trustee, cannot borrow against the trust, cannot access the principal even for Ivy's stated benefit. "I want a separate account for immediate needs," I continued. "School tuition, activities, medical care. Paid directly to providers, never through Margot's hands." "You're protecting Ivy from her own mother," Vernon said quietly. "I'm protecting Ivy from the woman Margot became when she married Sterling." The trust document was a fortress built from legal language. Walls high enough to protect Ivy even from the wreckage of her mother's choices. Vernon drafted the structure over 3 days. Independent corporate trustee, quarterly distributions for verified expenses, educational consultant to ensure proper schooling, medical oversight. Everything Ivy would need to grow up protected from the financial chaos surrounding her parents' prosecution. "There's something you should know," Vernon said. He was finalizing the paperwork. "Margot tried to access Ivy's existing college fund yesterday. The one you established when Ivy was born." My hands went still on the document I was signing. "I'd already transferred it into the new trust structure," Vernon continued. "She found the account empty with a notice redirecting all inquiries to the independent trustee. Margot's first instinct when facing poverty had been to raid her daughter's education fund, not to protect Ivy's future to fund her own legal defense.
The trustee will send Margot a formal letter, Vernon said, explaining that all of Ivy's financial security is now permanently beyond her reach or influence. I signed the final trust document. My signature sealing Ivy's protection. Vernon handed me one more paper. Family Court Custody Evaluation Order. They're assessing whether Margot can provide stable home environment while facing federal charges. I read it carefully. Interviews with both parents. Home visit evaluation. Child welfare assessment. The evaluator will want to interview you as potential guardian, Vernon said. The hearing is in 2 weeks. I called Simone to my office a week after the arrests. Needing to surround myself with people who'd proven loyalty meant more than blood. People who'd helped me save what my daughter tried to destroy. The custody evaluation was pending, but today I needed to focus on something I could control, rewarding those who'd stood beside me. Simone arrived promptly. No idea what was coming. I'm restructuring my estate plan, I said. The 20% equity stake originally designated for Margot will be redistributed to long-term employees. Simone's expression shifted to shock. You receive 5% for 12 years of dedicated service. Vernon receives 8% for 3 decades of loyal counsel. The remaining 7% splits among senior staff who maintained integrity. Ms. Harrington, I was just doing my job. You helped me expose a conspiracy by pretending I'd confused your name. I interrupted. That's beyond your job description. Vernon spoke from the doorway. The structure was planned 6 months ago, when Celeste first suspected Margot. We called it a loyalty incentive program to avoid tipping off the conspirators. Simone looked between us. You were planning this before the arrests? The revenge included rewarding goodness, I said quietly, not just punishing evil. Watching Simone's shock transform to tears of gratitude. I felt something I hadn't since Margot's arrest, hope that loyalty could be real. Full voting rights, profit participation, advisory board seats if you want them, Vernon explained. The company continues in the hands of people who helped protect it. I spent 40 years assuming family meant automatic loyalty, I said, never questioning if Margot valued what I'd built or just felt entitled to inherit it. Meanwhile, you earned my trust through thousands of small choices over decades. You're creating an employee ownership structure that ensures loyalty is rewarded across generations, Vernon said. I'm ensuring this company outlives me in the hands of people who actually love it. Simone's voice broke. I won't let you down. None of us will. The shares were more than equity. They were testament that chosen family could be stronger than blood. 4 years ago, a competitor offered me double salary, Simone said quietly. I almost took it. But then you sent me a handwritten note thanking me for managing that supply chain crisis. 2 sentences, probably 30 seconds to write, but it meant you noticed. She pulled a folded card from her jacket. I keep it in my desk. When the job gets hard, I read it. My own handwriting, faded but clear. Simone. Your crisis management today saved us $2 million and preserved relationships I spent years building. Thank you for protecting what matters. C.H. I'd forgotten writing it, but this small act had built the loyalty that saved me. The note reminded me I was building something meaningful, not just collecting a paycheck, Simone said. That's why I stayed. That's why I'll always stay. After Simone left, Vernon's expression shifted. He pulled up a document on his tablet. The custody evaluator's report came in early, he said. She's recommending you receive full legal guardianship of Ivy, with Margot granted supervised visitation only. I sat very still. The hearing is tomorrow. Margot's attorney filed an objection this morning. She's fighting the recommendation, claiming the evaluator was biased by the criminal charges and that you engineered her financial collapse to steal her daughter. The final battle. Tomorrow. What are our chances? I asked. With the evaluator's recommendation, 90%, but Margot will testify. She'll make it emotional. Claim redemption. Beg for one more chance to be Ivy's mother. I looked at the share redistribution documents, at Simone's faded thank you note still in my hands. Then I'll testify too, I said, about what kind of mother plans to lock her own mother in a cage. The revised will sat on Vernon's desk like a tombstone.
formal language that would outlive me to ensure my daughter inherited nothing, while my granddaughter inherited everything. That mattered. The custody hearing had ended 3 days ago. The judge granted me full guardianship of Ivy, with Margot permitted supervised visits only 2 hours monthly at a state-approved facility. My daughter had sat stone-faced as the ruling came down, her attorney whispering urgently in her ear while Ivy squeezed my hand. Now Vernon Garrison, 68, my estate attorney for 3 decades, adjusted his reading glasses and turned the document toward me. "I need to walk you through each provision before you sign," he said. "First, Margot is completely disinherited. Not just omitted, there's an explicit exclusion clause stating she receives nothing from your estate, trust, or any entity you control." I nodded. Vernon had drafted this language to survive any legal challenge. Ivy receives a $50 million educational and living trust managed by the First National Trust Company until she turns 30. Vernon continued. Your company equity, 48% of Harrington Holdings, transfers to an employee ownership trust. The remaining assets establish the Harrington Family Foundation for Culinary Education Scholarships. He paused, flipping to page 7. There's one provision you specifically requested that I want to highlight. If Margot contacts Ivy outside supervised court visits before Ivy turns 18, the trust immediately converts to a scholarship fund for children in foster care. Ivy would receive nothing. The cruelty of that clause took my breath away. Protecting Ivy by threatening to take everything from her if her mother violated the boundaries. Vernon was watching my face. It ensures Margot can't manipulate her, I said quietly. Can't promise reconciliation or use guilt to control her. I understand, Vernon said. But you need to understand what you're signing. Each signature felt like choosing Ivy over Margot again, and each time it hurt exactly the same amount. Completely. I signed the first page, then the second. Vernon's paralegal witnessed each signature, her face professionally neutral as I dismantled my daughter's future. The pen felt heavy, like it was carving the words into stone rather than paper. The final provision, Vernon said, turning to the last section. You've established a sealed letter to be held by my firm and delivered to Ivy on her 21st birthday. She'll receive it regardless of your status if you're alive, deceased, or incapacitated. I had written that letter over 6 drafts, trying to explain the unexplainable. How I loved Margot completely while destroying her completely. How protecting Ivy meant burning every bridge that connected grandmother to daughter. The letter would tell Ivy about the woman Margot had been before Sterling corrupted her. Brilliant, ambitious, occasionally ruthless, but never cruel. It would give her the choice I couldn't, to hate her mother or understand her. The letter explains everything, I told Vernon. When she's old enough to comprehend betrayal and desperation and the terrible mathematics of choosing between your child and your pea. Grandchild. The will was a bridge burned so thoroughly that Ivy could cross forward without looking back at the flames. I signed the final page. Vernon gathered the documents, his expression somber. I'll file this with the court tomorrow, he said. Your estate is now legally structured to protect Ivy and prevent Margot from accessing any assets. His assistant knocked, apologetic. Mr. Garrison, Margot Thornton's attorney is calling. He says it's urgent she wants to meet before the plea hearing next week. Something about Sterling's victim in Delaware that changes everything. Vernon looked at me, eyebrows raised. I thought of Sterling's previous marriage, the restraining order, the sealed divorce records. What could Margot possibly know that would change anything now? Tell him I'll consider it, I said, but only if he provides specifics first. The assistant nodded and left. Vernon closed the will folder. Be careful, he said. Desperation makes people dangerous, and Margot has nothing left to lose. Except, apparently, one final secret about the man who destroyed her, and possibly one last chance to destroy me. I declined Margot's attorney. Whatever Sterling's secrets were, they couldn't change what mattered now. Ivy's hands disappeared into flour up to her wrists as I taught her to knead dough in the test kitchen where I'd perfected the recipe.
that built everything 3 days after signing the will that gave her the future and took away her mother. "Like this, Grandma?" she asked, pressing her palm into the dough, flour dusting her cheeks. "Perfect. Feel how it resists. You're building structure." This was my original bread recipe, developed 40 years ago in a rented kitchen at 3 a.m. with burned hands. The foundation of my first bakery. The signature loaf that anchored everything after. Ivy kneaded with fierce concentration, and both tongue between her teeth. "Grandma, why does the dough need to rest?" "Because good things can't be rushed. You build slowly or not at all." "Is that how you built the bakery?" "That's how I built everything that lasted." The dough smoothed under her hands, transforming from shaggy mess to silk. The yeasty smell filled the kitchen. Honest, the scent of creation rather than acquisition. "Did my mom ever learn to bake?" Ivy asked casually. The question struck deep. I realized suddenly that Margot never wanted to. She'd been embarrassed by our bakery origins, wanted the money but not the work, the status but never the flour-dusted hands. She loved what the empire provided but hated where it came from. No, sweetheart, she preferred other things. Ivy nodded, shaped the dough into a ball, covered it with cloth. Now it rests. Watching Ivy shape the dough with careful hands, I saw what I was protecting, not just a child, but the possibility that one person raised with love instead of entitlement might build something beautiful. 2 days later, I sat alone in my office at sunset. The bread we'd baked together sat on my desk. Wrapped in linen, Ivy had insisted I take a loaf. 60 years building, 6 months discovering betrayal, 3 months dismantling conspiracy. Now, in settling quiet, I reckoned with what remained. Margot awaited sentencing. Sterling faced Delaware charges. My company belonged to the employees who'd built it. Ivy had a trust that would support dreams without spoiling character. And I had peace, the bitter kind that coexists with sorrow. I chose Ivy. I'd choose her again. That doesn't make it painless. The alternative haunted me. What if I'd ignored the warnings? Let them execute their plan. I'd be locked in a facility. Declared incompetent, drugged helpless while they ransacked everything. Ivy raised by people who valued her only as future asset. No, I protected what mattered. Margot made her choices, I made mine. We both have to live with the consequences. The setting sun painted Boston gold, and I understood empires fall, families fracture. But the choice to protect what's innocent, that endures. The city spread below, lights flickering on. My bakeries across 6 states would open before dawn. The employees who now owned 48% would make their own decisions. Ivy would grow up knowing she was worth protecting. That boundaries matter. That love sometimes looks like saying no. 60 years of building taught me this: protect your foundation or lose everything. But destroying Margot's conspiracy hadn't betrayed her. I'd saved her from becoming the kind of person who could cage her own mother and sleep well. Stopped her before she crossed from greed into true evil. Prison might give her what my money never could, the chance to understand consequences. To rebuild something real from nothing. Maybe that was my final lesson, taught in absence. I broke off a piece of the bread Ivy and I had made, still warm, imperfect, and honest, shaped by hands that knew both flour and justice. The crust crackled. I tasted it slowly, salt and yeast and thyme, the flavor of beginnings. Not mine this time, but hers. Outside. The city I'd helped build continued without my daughter, and I made peace with that. Some legacies you protect by letting go. And to you listening to my story, remember this: protecting what matters most sometimes means making choices that break your heart. Looking back, I wonder if I could have reached Margot sooner before Sterling's influence corrupted her completely. Maybe I was too focused on building the empire and not enough on building our relationship. Don't make my mistake of assuming your children understand boundaries just because you taught them values. Watch for the warning signs. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong, even if it's about your own family. What I learned is this: love without boundaries isn't protection, it's permission for destruction.
Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is say no, draw a line, and defend it with everything you have.
I chose to protect Ivy's future over Margot's comfort, and I'd make that choice again.
I believe God put me through this trial to teach me that real strength isn't in building empires. It's in having the courage to tear down what's corrupt to save what's innocent. That attorney's warning came exactly when I needed it, and I'm grateful I listened.
If this story made you think about family, boundaries, or the choices we make to protect the people we love,
Please leave a comment below. What would you have done in my situation? Share this story with someone who needs to hear it.
and if you'd like more stories about life's hardest decisions,
Please subscribe. Your engagement means the world to me. Thank you for staying until the very end. I know this wasn't easy to hear, but I hope it gave you something to consider. Remember, some details have been adjusted for storytelling purposes. What matters is the lesson about protecting what's precious,
even when it costs everything.